Hi, my name's Indigo, and I guess I was never really invited to my own life. At my sister's birthday gala, while she held a glass and smiled for cameras, I was behind the curtain, bleeding, barely breathing. I begged for help. My mom looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't embarrass us." They always said I was dramatic, too sensitive, a burden. But what if I told you the pain wasn't in my head? What if the fainting, the bruises, the silence were all real? And what if the family who dressed me up for photos were the same ones who ignored me when I collapsed? Would you still call me dramatic? Or would you finally listen? They say you can feel it before you see it, being erased. You don't need a screaming match or someone slamming a door to know you've been written out of your own family's story. Sometimes, all it takes is a camera shutter and a missing chair. 2 days before Celine's birthday gala, the Langley estate in Savannah smelled like cut roses and steamed linen. Every surface had been polished until it gleamed like we lived in a showroom, not a home. Staff buzzed around like bees, aligning florals, checking lighting, ironing out tablecloth creases for the 5th time. I'd been told to wear ivory. "So the family photo looks balanced," Mom said. She handed me a silk shawl in a shade just a touch too yellow for my skin. Celine wore a crisp, pearl-white dress tailored to her figure like a second skin. She glowed like she always did. Centered, surrounded, adored. The photo session took place in the main salon, where the light from the high windows made everything feel sterile. We were supposed to look like the southern version of American royalty, dignified, unified, polished. Vera, my mother, walked in, already posing. Dad followed, adjusting the cuffs of his French shirt like he'd just walked off a yacht. "Celine in the middle," the photographer called. No one objected. I stood quietly to the side, waiting to be placed. Then, mid-snap, someone from the staff pulled away one of the chairs, the one closest to me. "Oh, we just need the core 4 in this frame," Mom said without turning. I froze. The core 4, as if I was a misprint, an extra syllable, an accessory that didn't match the dress code. Celine didn't even glance my way. Dad gave a tight smile to the camera. I stepped back, hands behind my back, heart thudding quietly in my chest. It wasn't the first time I'd been excluded, but the quietness of it, how natural it seemed to everyone else, cut deeper than any open insult. After the flash, they reset for a new pose. I stood in the corner, half in shadow. A waiter passed by and offered me a glass of sparkling water. I almost asked for something stronger, but shook my head. Back in the dining hall, the cake had arrived. A towering, fondant-covered monument of perfection, 3 tiers, white and gold. At the base, in cursive icing, celebrating Celine, the pride of Langley. Just her name. No "Happy Birthday Celine and Indigo." No Langley sisters. Not even in family. I felt my face flush as the room erupted in claps. I kept my smile polite, held my chin at just the right angle for the cameras. From across the room, my aunt leaned toward a guest and said, not quietly, "I keep forgetting they have another daughter." No one corrected her. After the crowd dispersed and Celine moved into rehearsing her speech, I found a quiet spot near the back patio. The light outside had turned amber. Spanish moss swayed gently on the oak trees just beyond the garden. This house, this life, it had a script. Celine was the leading lady. Dad, the financier. Mom, the producer and director. And me, I was the production assistant. The one who fetched coffee, made sure no one tripped on a cord, and stayed off camera. I don't think it was always like this. At least, not in the beginning. But over time, every family dinner, every parent-teacher conference, every holiday photo told the same story. Indigo was present, but not central. Necessary, but not celebrated. I was the variable in an equation that had no room for error. Later that evening, as everyone fussed over Celine's speech delivery, I approached Mom quietly, away from the ears of staff. "Was my name ever going to be on the cake?" I asked. My voice didn't shake, though my palms itched with heat. She didn't look up from her phone. "Indigo, not this again. You know how important this weekend is. Don't bring that energy here." "Right. Wouldn't want to ruin the vibe." She finally looked up, sharp. "You always take things so personally." I wanted to laugh. How else was I supposed to take my own erasure? Instead, I nodded. You're right. Sorry. She turned and walked away before I finished my apology. Celine stood under a spotlight a few minutes later, testing her mic. The sound tech adjusted levels while she practiced her opening line with that pageant polish she'd mastered since she was 10. Every word perfectly paced, perfectly pleasant. A waiter approached from behind with a flute of champagne, offering it toward Celine. But she'd moved already, so the glass ended up in my hand. Oh, sorry, he stammered, seeing my face. You look a bit like her from behind. Don't worry, I said with a practiced smile. It happens. He walked away. I held the champagne glass in my hand, feeling its chill bleed into my fingers. I turned toward the large window. Celine's reflection stood bright in the center, surrounded by light and movement. Mine blurred along the edges, caught between the glare and the darkness beyond. And for a moment, I wondered if I really existed at all. The shoes I wore that night weren't mine, they were Celine's. And they were too small, just like everything in that house that wasn't built for me. They sat on the rug next to my bed the morning before the gala, gleaming with a kind of cruel anticipation. Pointed toes, 4-inch heels, nude leather, pristine. I'd picked out my own flats the week before, something I could walk in without bruising, but Mom walked in holding the heels like a peace offering wrapped in power. Celine thinks these will look better for the family shots, she said, placing them by my feet as if the decision had already been made. I didn't argue. I'd learned that resistance only made things worse, more dramatic, more indulgent, as Mom called it. I quietly set aside my chosen pair and slipped into the ones Celine deemed more cohesive. They pinched immediately, biting into the skin above my toes, but I kept them on. Then came the dress. I had a pale blue satin dress laid out, something soft and forgiving. I'd bought it with my own money, modest but elegant. But Mom returned from a final fitting with a tight sequined number, navy and unforgiving. Celine wants cohesion, she repeated, and that was that. I peeled out of my dress, slipped on the one she brought. It clung to my hips too tightly. I could feel the zipper scrape up my spine like a whisper of disapproval. We gathered in the grand foyer at 6:30. Staff bustled around, adjusting centerpieces, balancing champagne glasses, whispering about last-minute run-throughs. Vera floated down the stairs in a silk shawl like she was born under a chandelier. Celine followed, radiating assurance, with a pearl-encrusted clutch in one hand and a small army behind her. I walked behind them to the ballroom. The heels were already drawing blood. Every step was deliberate. Heel, toe, bite. The hem of my dress swished just low enough to hide the worst of it, but I could feel the sting seeping upward. The carpeted hallway did nothing to dull the pain. When we reached the ballroom, the room erupted in flashes. Staff members bowed their heads slightly. Guests greeted my parents and Celine with practiced adoration. No one looked at me. I slipped into my chair at the far end of the head table, feet pulsing. The gala rehearsal began, a full run-through with speeches, lighting cues, music, introductions. Celine stood front and center under a golden spotlight, rehearsing her opening line. "It's not about me," she began, smiling, hands open. "It's about what we can do for those less fortunate." I clenched my jaw. Each minute dragged. The heels dug deeper. My breath shortened. My hands started to sweat. Every movement sparked a new jolt. By the time Celine reached the third draft of her closing line, I could feel a sticky warmth pooling inside my shoe. Still, I stayed seated. I smiled when the coordinator glanced my way. I nodded when Mom gave a thumbs up. The only thing louder than the music was the sound of my pulse in my ears. Eventually, I excused myself quietly and made my way backstage, ducking through the side entrance where staff prepped staging. My feet screamed with each step. Behind a black curtain, I pulled one shoe off and stared. The sole was dotted with blood. The back of my heel had split open. I pulled a tissue from my clutch and pressed it down, trying not to cry out. A voice behind me startled me. "You okay?" It was a young server, maybe 20, holding a tray of empty glasses. "I'm fine," I said quickly, pressing the tissue harder. "Just tight shoes." He nodded sympathetically and disappeared. I stood, one heel on, one off, swaying slightly. Then I heard Mom's voice, just outside the curtain. "Where is she?" "We have the final sequence starting in 5 minutes." I stepped out, both shoes back on, posture forced upright. "I'm here." She didn't look at my face. "Don't embarrass us, Indigo. Just smile and be graceful." Her words landed harder than the pain in my feet. I nodded once. No comeback, no emotion, just a nod. And I walked with her back into the light. Celine stood smiling beside a slideshow screen as applause echoed across the ballroom. I returned to my seat, folded my hands, and clapped along. No one noticed the way I leaned slightly to my left, trying to ease pressure off the deeper wound on my right heel. As the applause continued, the camera crew swept across the stage, capturing B-roll for social media. I forced my smile wider. When the flash hit my face, I saw stars. At one point, Dad leaned over and said, "You're doing good. Just keep still. You know how she gets if things feel off." He meant Mom, but he didn't have to say it. We all knew. The pain didn't plateau. It evolved. It sharpened, radiated. I imagined the blood was spreading across the arch of my foot, soaking into the leather, but the show had to go on. The speeches began again, and this time I couldn't focus. My vision flickered. I tried to track Celine's voice, but the syllables blurred together like distant traffic. I blinked, gripped the edge of the table, whispered to myself, "Don't faint, not in front of them." After another hour, the room grew louder, the lights sharper, the air tighter. I needed to breathe. I stood quietly and slipped away, weaving through a knot of waiters, clutching the curtain on the side stage as my body tilted. Behind the drapes, it was darker and quieter, but no cooler. My hands trembled. I leaned against the wall, trying to balance. My chest tightened like a vice. A rush of heat surged through my spine. I slid down until I was crouched, hands around my knees, one heel off again. I pulled the other off and immediately felt relief. And the warm stickiness of blood along the inside of the shoe. No one followed. No one asked where I went. I looked at my hands. They shook uncontrollably, glistening with sweat and something darker near the nail beds. I closed my eyes. The nausea rose like a slow tide. "I am not going to faint," I whispered to myself. "Not in front of them." I pressed both palms to the floor, grounded myself in that cold tile. And yet, something in me already knew. I was fading. The next thing I remembered clearly was the soft click of my bedroom door closing behind me. I had made it up the stairs somehow, after slipping away from the ballroom, after sitting behind the curtain trying not to pass out, after stuffing tissues into my heels to soak the blood. The hallway lights were still on. The house was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of Celine's voice coming through the vents, still rehearsing her speech, probably adding new flourishes to make the audience cry. I lowered myself onto the edge of my bed like someone easing onto a ledge. My thighs trembled from holding back the shakes all night. I kicked off the shoes and stared at them, still pristine on the outside, but soaked red on the inside lining. They looked expensive and merciless. My feet were raw. Blisters had opened and fused with the leather. I took a damp towel from the vanity and pressed it against one heel. The sting made my eyes blur. Still, no tears. I was long past crying over surface pain. As I sat there, breathing in shallow gulps and staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror, one image kept flashing in my head. I was 11. I'd just collapsed in gym class during a spring fitness test. The teacher thought I was faking it until I vomited on the mat. I ended up in the nurse's office. Dizzy, nauseated, struggling to keep my eyes open. I remembered the nurse's worried face, the cool compress on my forehead, and the soft tone in her voice when she said, "I'm going to send a note home." I should have known what would happen next. Celine got hold of the note before I did. I remember her standing in our kitchen later that night, waving the crumpled paper like a flag. "Maybe experiencing pre-syncope," she read aloud in a dramatic tone. "That's just fancy talk for too lazy to run laps." She laughed. My parents chuckled. Dad even patted Celine on the shoulder, impressed with her pronunciation. Mom said nothing at all. She just looked at me and muttered, "Stop overdoing it. No one wants to hear about your stomach every week. That moment never left me. It was the first time I realized my pain, real, medical, validated, was a punchline in this house. Years later, I found out there'd been more. I was 17 when I stumbled across a sealed envelope tucked into the bottom drawer of Mom's desk. It had my name on it. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a letter from a vascular specialist, someone from Atlanta. It was dated 18 months earlier. The letter confirmed what I'd always feared, but never had the words to say: abnormal blood flow, fragile vessels, elevated risk of syncope under stress or heat. A recommendation for ongoing monitoring and gentle physical therapy. None of that had ever been told to me. No appointments had been made. No one even mentioned the name of the doctor. I had confronted Mom about it once, casually, as if I hadn't already read every word. "Do you remember, Doctor Hanley from Atlanta?" I asked. "He wrote me a letter about some test results." Her reaction was instant and sharp. "That wasn't important. It would have made you paranoid. You hid a diagnosis from me. I protected you from labeling yourself," she said coldly. "The last thing we needed was you playing the victim." And there it was again, my health reduced to her brand management. Back in the present, I leaned forward, placing both feet flat on the floor. The pain was less now, muted by exhaustion. But the anger had started to simmer. I glanced at the small package I had left by the door earlier in the day, a gift I'd worked on for 2 weeks. A framed watercolor I'd painted from a photograph of Celine and me as kids. It wasn't just art, it was the last piece of me trying to connect to her. I'd placed it on the designated gift table in the afternoon, wrapped in cream paper with a hand-tied blue ribbon. No card. I wanted her to recognize it without instruction. But an hour later, I saw it had been replaced. A Gucci handbag now sat in the exact same spot, with a crisp white tag that read, "From Indigo." I knew instantly who had done it. When I asked Mom, she didn't even blink. "The painting didn't match the aesthetic," she said, sipping her wine. "It looked too homemade. This is a curated event, Indigo. We have a standard to maintain." I nodded, but something cracked inside me. It wasn't just the gift. It wasn't just the shoes, or the dress, or the years of being invisible. It was all of it, stacked, layer by layer, like the chairs at the gala that only had space for 4. I sat back down on my bed, opened my phone, and pressed the record button. "My name is Indigo Langley. I am not dramatic, I am not delicate, I am not ungrateful or attention-seeking or whatever version of me they keep rewriting. I am tired, I am bruised, and I remember everything." I paused, then saved the voice memo. It felt good to hear my voice. Strong, measured, unfiltered. I opened my laptop and pulled out the flash drive I'd kept hidden in an old mascara tube for months. Slowly, deliberately, I began organizing the folders. Video clips, one from last Christmas when Mom told me not to ruin the holiday after I fainted from standing too long. Audio files, recordings of whispered insults, of Celine joking that I was born allergic to joy. Screenshots of text threads where I was labeled fragile and a PR problem. I didn't collect these things to start a war. I collected them to remember that I wasn't imagining it. But tonight, that collection took on a new purpose. I created a folder on my desktop called "For When They Won't Listen." Inside it, I placed everything, labeled it clearly, dated it. Then I opened my email and drafted a message. Subject line: "The truth behind the Langley image." Recipients: 2 local reporters, 1 Atlanta health rights advocate, and a handful of family friends who had always looked at me like I was furniture in the background of someone else's story. I scheduled the email. Midnight, just as the final champagne glasses would be raised at Celine's birthday gala. I shut the laptop and took one last glance in the mirror. My face looked pale, but calm. My hands were still trembling, but less so. My chest ached, but the pressure had shifted. They took my voice for granted. I decided to let the silence speak louder. If there was ever a time to test how much I could endure, it was the gala, and I was about to find out where the line ended. That morning started with a light drizzle that cleared by noon, leaving the Langley garden damp but glistening under the late afternoon sun. The family had insisted on a pre-event photo shoot in the estate's back lawn because, of course, a birthday gala wouldn't be complete without a few staged moments of spontaneous elegance. By the time I stepped outside, the air had thickened with humidity, and the grass was still soft from rain. The crew had already set up white velvet chairs, floral arches, and a massive silver balloon arrangement that spelled Celine 30. Everyone was dressed in shades of white and silver, carefully coordinated like they were born in the same color palette. Celine wore an off-the-shoulder gown that sparkled every time she turned. Mom had on a silk sheath dress that somehow managed to look both effortless and custom-tailored. Even Dad, who usually grumbled about these events, stood tall in a pale linen blazer and crisp slacks. Me? I wore a satin slip dress Vera had picked out. It was too tight across the chest, and the tone was just off. More cream than white. I had tried to tell her it clashed. And her answer, "You're not the focal point, Indigo. You'll be in the second row." So I stood there, in the margins, waiting for direction. "Closer, everyone," the photographer called. "Let's bring Celine to center. Mom on the left, Dad on the right." I moved toward them, as instructed. "Indigo," Celine said under her breath, barely turning her head. "Your dress doesn't match. Just hang back a little, yeah?" My feet froze. I glanced at Mom, but she didn't say a word. She adjusted Celine's sleeve instead, fussing like a pageant mom at regionals. I stepped back onto the wet grass. My heels sank with each inch I retreated. A squish, then a shift. One ankle tilted slightly. I steadied myself, planted both feet. It wasn't the first time I'd been asked to fade. The camera clicked. The flashes came. Laughter. Fake candids. "Celine, look this way." Vera, hand on her shoulder. "Yes, like that." I stood behind them, outside the perfect frame, watching my family perform joy. A couple walked by behind the setup. They were older, probably friends of my parents from the tennis club. I heard the woman whisper, "Is she the adopted one?" They weren't even trying to be discreet. My stomach knotted. I glanced down at my phone, mostly to avoid eye contact. One new message from an unknown number. I opened it. My breath caught. Hope the drama queen keeps it together this time. Last thing we need is another seizure stunt. Attached was a laughing emoji. Below that, a name, Sienna Harper, Celine's best friend since college. Of course, I didn't respond. I just stared at the message, thumbs hovering. My cheeks burned, not from embarrassment, but from fury so sharp it felt surgical. This wasn't just neglect anymore. It was cruelty with a smile and a gloss finish. I turned toward Celine, who was now holding a white parasol for the final shots. "If I collapse tonight," I said, voice low, controlled, "I hope you remember it's not for show." She didn't flinch, didn't even look at me. "Then don't," she replied, like she was brushing lint off her gown. It was the dismissal that did it, not the insult, not the sarcasm, the sheer lack of concern. Like my existence was a nuisance to be tolerated only because it couldn't be cropped out of real life. I walked away, not dramatically, not stomping, just enough to feel the ache in my feet again, to remember I was still inside this body, and it still hurt. I found a corner of the garden behind a row of azaleas. The air was still thick, but at least it was quiet. I pulled out my phone, opened my email app, and checked the draft again. To be sent. 12:00 a.m. Subject: The truth behind the Langley image. Attachments: 13. It was ready. And yet, a sliver of doubt crept in. Would anyone care? Would they say I was bitter, ungrateful, vindictive? I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. I wanted the truth to live somewhere outside my body. A few minutes passed before I heard someone approaching. It was Dad. "There you are," he said. "Photos are wrapping. They need you back inside for the family candle lighting." I nodded, but didn't move. He hesitated. "You okay?" I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't bother pretending. "No," I said, "but I'm used to it." He blinked, looked down at the grass, then walked away. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden haze over the backyard. The evening breeze stirred the balloon arch, which rattled slightly. From somewhere inside the house, I could hear the start of cocktail hour, the clink of glasses, upbeat jazz, the murmur of guests arriving. I stood still, the weight of what I'd set in motion sitting in my chest like a ticking clock. At midnight, the countdown would end. I had given them every chance to see me. That night, my body didn't ask for permission. It simply gave out. The fall wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream or reach out for help. I just went down, quietly, deliberately, as if my body had chosen that moment to finally surrender, even though my mind kept shouting, "Not yet." When I opened my eyes, I was still behind the curtain. The muffled sounds of the gala seeped through the thick fabric, glasses clinking, jazz playing, the buzz of guests exchanging polite lies about how amazing everything looked. Somehow, I stood up. I wasn't sure how long I'd been down, seconds, maybe minutes. The pain in my feet was white-hot, pulsing with each heartbeat. I grabbed the nearest chair for support, straightened my dress, and limped back toward the prep area. Inside the green room, chaos reigned. Stylists darted around Celine, fluffing her hair, adjusting her neckline, spritzing perfume that smelled like expensive exhaustion. A caterer rushed past with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Someone yelled about lighting. Everyone moved like they were part of a production, each motion rehearsed. No one noticed me. I sank into the corner chair, kicked off my heels beneath the table, and stared at my feet. The bandages I had wrapped earlier had soaked through. The blisters had torn open. Blood stained the back of the shoes. Not metaphorical pain, literal. An assistant walked by, glanced down, then gasped, "Oh God, are you okay?" I nodded. "Just a bad fit." She knelt down, genuinely concerned, reaching for her phone. "Do you want me to get the med?" Before she could finish, Mom swooped in from nowhere. "She's fine," Vera said sharply. "Just put the shoes back on." Her tone didn't leave room for questions. The assistant stood up quickly and backed away, her eyes flickering between concern and deference. Twist the knife, I thought. Don't just ignore the pain, demand it. With shaky hands, I unwrapped a fresh set of Band-Aids from my clutch and reapplied them to the rawest spots. I pushed my feet back into those heels. Each toe screamed. But I stood. Because if I didn't, they'd say I was being difficult, that I was trying to take attention away from Celine, that I was selfish. I walked toward the staging hallway, each step deliberate, biting down pain like it was candy-coated. Celine appeared at the door, radiant and ready for her entrance. She glanced at me, half smirk, half dismissive sigh. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, "I get it. You're tired. But this night? It's not about you." She tilted her head. "You're not the centerpiece. You're the filler. Twist S8, straight to the gut." I didn't answer. My fingers instinctively brushed the edge of my phone inside the clutch. The recording, the files, the email timer, they pulsed in my mind like a second heartbeat. She leaned in slightly. "Try not to wobble out there. Those shoes look like they're eating you alive." I looked her dead in the eye. "You might want to enjoy this while it lasts." She laughed. Not loudly, just enough to let me know I hadn't rattled her. "Save it for your Instagram followers," she said, waving her hand like I was a fly near her glass of Prosecco. I stepped back. She walked away. The music outside shifted, cueing the family entrance. I walked into the restroom adjacent to the green room. The mirror above the sink showed a face I barely recognized. Pale, drawn, tight-lipped. My makeup had started to melt in the heat. I opened my concealer, dabbed it under my eyes, over the fresh bruising on my cheekbone where I must have hit the floor earlier. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed it in. Then I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, opened the voice memos app, and pressed record. "My name is Indigo Langley. This is being recorded at 5:52 p.m. just before the gala. I'm standing in the guest restroom. My feet are bleeding. My body hurts. But I'm still here because I have something to say." And at midnight, whether I'm conscious or not, the truth will be said. I ended the recording and saved it, then slipped the phone back into the clutch like a weapon. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallway. The ballroom was alive now. Guests had arrived. The flash of cameras blinked from under the door. I took one final deep breath, pressed the back of my hands to my thighs to stop the shaking, and stepped out. Mom stood waiting by the archway, clipboard in hand. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe, assessing, not admiring. "You look tolerable," she said. "Just keep smiling, and no sudden exits, understood?" I nodded. Wouldn't dream of it. She didn't catch the sarcasm. She never did. The moment we walked into the ballroom, all eyes turned to Celine. She glittered, arms outstretched, smile camera ready. Vera and Dad flanked her like bodyguards. I followed a few paces behind, like a last-minute RSVP. The applause was deafening. I smiled. But inside, my heart had already started burning. When I stepped onto that ballroom floor, I knew this was the last time I'd ever let them use me for their image. I stood tall, even though my knees trembled beneath the sequined dress that never truly fit. My smile stayed fixed, practiced. But my jaw, that was clenched so tight it ached. The air inside the ballroom was thick. Perfume, candle wax, warm lighting, and tension. 100 guests, maybe more, scattered across white gold tables. Every centerpiece screamed perfection. Every face turned when Celine walked in, bathed in spotlight like she'd arrived from a better life. I followed 5 steps behind. Then the MC, bless his unaware heart, called out into the microphone. "Before we begin tonight's formal program, we'd love to invite Celine's sister to say a few words." For a beat, silence. All heads turned. Mom stiffened. Celine blinked, caught off guard for once. Dad's hand twitched on his glass. I walked forward. My heels clicked softly over the polished floor. Every step was agony, but my spine held steady. The mic waited at center stage like a dare. I stepped up, took a breath, looked out at a sea of faces I barely knew, but somehow still feared. "Good evening," I began, voice low but steady. And then, static. Nothing. My voice didn't carry. I glanced down. The mic's light had turned off. I tapped it gently, twice. The MC moved to approach, clearly confused. Someone behind me muttered something about technical difficulties. Celine appeared next to me almost instantly. She reached for the mic with that perfect, glossy smile. "It's okay," she said sweetly into the dead air. "Let's keep things moving." A few guests clapped. That was it. No speech. No chance to finish a sentence. I nodded, gave a small shrug like it didn't matter, and stepped aside. My stomach churned as the applause grew louder. Celine was already mid-pose, angling toward the camera crew that had resumed filming. The moment would be reframed as spontaneous, authentic, intentional. I walked off the stage slowly, my pulse thudding behind my ears. A waiter near the back caught my eye and leaned in slightly. "You handled that with class," he whispered. I didn't respond. I couldn't. It wasn't kindness I needed right now. It was oxygen. I stepped behind the curtain, found the same corner I'd crumpled in earlier, and exhaled. Mom was waiting. She marched in from the hallway, expression sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't wait until we were alone. "What the hell was that?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but lethal. "You were told not to get involved in the speaking segment." "I didn't ask to speak," I said, still stunned. "They called me up." "You should have declined," she snapped. "Celine is the focus tonight. You're there to support, not steal attention." "I wasn't trying to—" "You never do." That's the problem. Her words hit harder than the mic failure. That was when I heard a small sound, a faint click, like a phone's camera app closing. I turned my head. Standing off to the side, just inside the door, was one of the staff, a young man in a black vest and tie. I recognized him vaguely. He'd helped set up floral arrangements earlier, but his eyes weren't on the decor now. They were on Mom. And his phone was still in his hand. He met my gaze, didn't smile, didn't blink, just nodded once, and walked away. I didn't think much of it in the moment. The next 10 minutes passed in a blur. Celine gave her speech, flawless, emotional, beautifully hollow. The crowd clapped at all the right moments, laughed on cue, wiped tears that weren't quite real. I stood near the back, half hidden behind a decorative column, trying not to collapse again. My shoes were off now, tucked into my clutch. I couldn't take another step in them. My feet throbbed with each pulse. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message, just a video file. I tapped it open. It was grainy, slightly off-center, but unmistakable. There was my mother, lit by the warm hallway sconces, leaning into my face, venom in her tone. You never do. That's the problem. The video ended. No commentary, no caption, just the raw truth. Attached to it was one sentence. You deserve to be heard. My hands trembled, not from fear, but something else, recognition. That boy, he'd been one of my students last year in an after-school painting program I volunteered for. Quiet, observant, always watching. He'd watched me now, too. I smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. Then I watched the clip again, slower this time, not because I needed confirmation, but because I was savoring the crack in the mask. That crack would become a canyon. I opened my preset email draft. Subject, the truth behind the Langley image. Attachments, now 14. I added the clip, hit save, and then I hit schedule. Delivery time, 12 a.m. sharp. To press@localnewsga.com, editor@womeninjustice.org, 4 longtime family friends, and a few select former teachers and donors Celine had claimed to represent. It was done. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked, barefoot, steady, to the powder room, washed my hands, smoothed the front of my dress, checked that my phone still buzzed with life in my clutch. And for the first time in a long time, I felt taller than Celine. They wanted silence. I gave them truth, unmuted and unstoppable. The seconds after scheduling that email felt louder than the gala itself. A soft, steady roar buzzed in my ears, half adrenaline, half the weight of everything I'd carried for years pressing against my chest. I didn't move, not right away. I just stood there, behind the column, heels off, breathing unevenly as the MC announced Celine's final toast. Ladies and gentlemen, at the stroke of midnight, we raise our glasses to celebrate not just a birthday, but a legacy. I could practically hear Vera grinning behind her champagne glass. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly for effect. Candles flickered in rhythm with the background music. Celine stepped into the center, now bathed in soft gold. Her dress shimmered. Her earrings sparkled. Her smile could have sold miracles. Everyone stood, flutes in hand, poised for a picture-perfect moment. And then, the screens went black. All 3 of them, 2 behind the stage and 1 large overhead projector, suddenly flickered out. There was a short pause, a whisper. Some guests glanced around, assuming a technical glitch. Vera turned sharply toward the sound booth, brows furrowed. Celine froze mid-gesture, hands still raised, eyes darting left, then right. And then my face appeared. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't rehearsed. It was just me. No makeup touch-up, no lighting filter, no pretenses. The frame showed me in my bedroom the night before, sitting by my window, voice low but steady. Hi, if you're watching this, it means I couldn't say these things to you in person. Or maybe I already tried, and you didn't listen. Gasps filled the room. A few guests sat down, stunned. Others leaned forward, eyes wide. Someone spilled a drink, and no one even looked down. I'm Indigo Langley, the video continued. Daughter, sister, background character in the Langley brand. I've lived in the shadows of smiles and sponsorships for years. But what I've carried was never silent. The clip cut to scanned medical documents, slowly cross-fading between them. Diagnostic notes, doctor's memos. A bold header, needs ongoing supervision, prone to fainting episodes under physical and emotional stress. Another voice entered next, one that wasn't mine, Vera's. She exaggerates everything. It's attention-seeking. Always has been. Someone gasped audibly. A woman near the stage covered her mouth. Her husband pulled out his phone. The video then cut to footage taken from a family dinner 2 years ago, Celine's birthday. I was sitting quietly at the far end of the table while everyone else toasted. Midway through the speech, I slid off my chair. My head hit the floor. Celine looked down, rolled her eyes, and turned to the waiter. "Can you just bring the cake out now?" The camera panned to Dad, still eating. Then back to Celine, now speaking at a fundraiser. "My family means everything to me. I wouldn't be here without their unconditional love." Back to me. Back to reality. The ballroom had fallen silent, save for the steady stream of audio from the screen. People were no longer just watching, they were reacting. One of Celine's sponsors, an older woman from a regional beauty brand, stood and walked out, shaking her head. Another whispered to a colleague and slid their phone into their purse while texting furiously. A group of young guests in the back opened Instagram and started recording. Vera stood up. "Turn it off," she said to no one and everyone. "Right now." But it was too late. The AV team didn't move. Or maybe they were waiting, or maybe one of them had already forwarded the video to the press email listed in the credits at the end of the file. Because yes, there were credits, names, dates, sources, receipts. And the closing screen read, "Not for revenge, for truth." Then silence. Celine was still standing at the center of the stage, stunned. The mic she had held like a scepter now hung at her side. Her lips parted, but no words came out. That silence was everything I had waited for. Until the first headline hit. Someone's phone buzzed, loud enough to hear. They turned the screen toward a friend. I caught a glimpse of the title. Savannah's Princess Under Fire, Sisters Allegations, Rock Langley Family. Celine's face crumpled for a fraction of a second before she collected herself and turned to Vera. "I told you she was going to ruin it," she said through gritted teeth. Vera stepped off the stage, nearly knocking over a tray of drinks. She reached the AV booth, yelling something that got lost under the swell of voices now rising throughout the room. One by one, guests began to walk out. Then came the vibration in my clutch. A notification popped up on my phone screen. From brand rep at siennaskinco.com. Subject: Partnership hold. Body: Due to the recent incident, all contracts with Celine Langley are temporarily suspended pending further review. I didn't smile, but I also didn't flinch. I turned, ready to leave through the back hallway, but the pain in my chest stopped me short. A sharp, stabbing weight pressed against my ribcage, and I lost my balance. I reached for the wall. Missed. My knees buckled. Everything spun. And the last thing I saw before the lights above me dissolved into static was someone running toward me. "Help!" a voice shouted. "She's down!" A pair of arms reached under mine. "Get a medic! Now!" My clutch hit the floor with a soft thud. I heard my phone buzz again. Then nothing. Because I passed out to the sound of my own voice echoing across a ballroom that had finally gone silent. When I came to, the light above me wasn't from a chandelier. There were no candlelit centerpieces or branded cocktail napkins, just a ceiling with white acoustic tiles and a faint buzzing from a machine behind my head. I was in a hospital room. My mouth was dry. My arms ached. An IV line ran from the inside of my wrist up to a clear bag beside the bed. I blinked, adjusting to the sterile light, the hum of air conditioning, the absence of voices. There were no flowers, no balloons, no family. A nurse entered a few minutes later. Her name tag said, Elena. She smiled kindly and touched my wrist to check my pulse. "You're awake," she said gently. "That's good." I nodded, slow, groggy. "How long?" "Overnight," she replied. "You collapsed at the Langley Foundation Gala. Paramedics brought you in just after midnight." Midnight. It hit me then. The email, the video. The moment I'd spent years preparing for. I looked toward the small TV in the corner of the room. It was already on, muted, tuned to a local morning show. At the bottom of the screen, the headline read, "Sister Speaks, Indigo Langley Breaks Silence on Gala Stage Collapse." Beside it, a freeze frame of my face from the video, blurry but raw. Elena followed my gaze. "You've been on every channel this morning," she said. "People are listening." The next visitor wasn't family. It was Mrs. Odette Marlowe, my former art teacher, mentor, and in many ways, the only adult who ever believed me without hesitation. She didn't say much when she walked in, just placed her handbag on the chair beside my bed and sat down, her eyes full but calm. "I've been waiting here since 6 a.m., she said. "They wouldn't let me in sooner." I managed a faint smile. "Still pushing boundaries, huh?" "Some things are worth pushing for," she replied. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, one I recognized from our last meeting a month earlier. Inside were legal documents, name change forms, filed, signed, approved. "You said you wanted to wait until after the gala," she said. "Do you still want to go through with it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She passed me the pen. My hand shook as I took it, not from fear but from something deeper, liberation. I signed the line where it said, "Petitioner's signature," scratched out Indigo Langley, and wrote what I had decided weeks ago, Indigo Marlowe. Odette watched me, then quietly whispered, "It's yours now, fully." I sat back against the pillows, the pen still in my hand, and whispered, "Indigo stands on its own now." An hour later, the hospital room phone rang. It wasn't the family. It was a reporter, then another, then someone from the State Department of Family and Child Services. Each voice different, but the theme the same, asking if I was ready to talk. I told them not yet. Outside, news vans lined the hospital sidewalk. I didn't need to see them to know they were there. The nurse confirmed it. One even tried to slip past security, claiming to be an old friend. Typical. By noon, social media had exploded, screenshots of the video, clips, reactions. The tag, #HereIndigo was trending. Influencers reposted it. Survivors shared their own stories. Then the messages started arriving. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. Some were from strangers, others from old classmates, people I hadn't seen since high school. One was from my 9th grade gym teacher, who apologized for not recognizing the signs when I collapsed in her class. But none came from my parents. Not a call, not a message, not a single acknowledgement. It stung, more than I wanted to admit. Even after everything, even after Vera screamed, "This is a private matter," at reporters outside the gala, I'd thought maybe, just maybe. But no. Their silence was consistent, at least. A nurse wheeled in lunch, but I barely touched it. My stomach had twisted into knots. That evening, I was transferred to a private recovery room. The lights were warmer there, the air quieter. I could finally exhale without my lungs seizing. Odette came back with something wrapped in a manila envelope. "I figured this might help," she said, placing it on the table. Inside was a printed copy of the article that had just gone live on Savannah Local. "When silence breaks the ceiling, Indigo Marlowe tells her story." I read every word, slowly, carefully. There was no spin, no distortion, just my voice, finally heard. The journalist had done it justice. They included quotes from the video, evidence from my documents, even testimonials from former teachers and neighbors, and at the end, a simple paragraph. "Indigo doesn't seek revenge. She seeks to be seen, to be understood. And now, finally, she is." I folded the article and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. That night, for the first time in what felt like years, I slept without nightmares. The next morning, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. I opened it slowly. Inside, on lined stationery, were just a few sentences. "I saw you. Before they didn't. Before they decided not to. I always saw you. Love, Grandma." I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with justice. It begins with being believed. The transition from Langley to Marlowe wasn't just legal, it was cellular. The name change wasn't about spite or rebellion. It was about breath, space. The quiet realization that I didn't have to carry a legacy built on silence and shine I never consented to. The new place was small, just 3 rooms, one of them barely big enough for a twin bed and a makeshift art corner, but it was mine. the house I now call home smelled like paint and possibility. And this time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. On my third morning there, while unpacking one of the final boxes Odette had tucked away for safekeeping, I found the letter. A small envelope, aged at the corners, with my name on it in my grandmother's handwriting. She'd passed 5 years ago, and I hadn't known she'd written me anything. The letter was dated 3 days after my 16th birthday. You were never invisible, child. You were just surrounded by the blind. They see what shines, not what glows. But glow lasts longer. Keep glowing, even if no one claps. I didn't cry, not right away. I sat with it, let it move through me like warmth. Then folded it carefully and placed it into the top drawer of my desk, next to a sketchbook I hadn't touched in months. That afternoon, I put on running shoes and went outside. I didn't plan to run, just to walk a little, get some fresh air. The Savannah spring had started to bloom. The sidewalk was dappled in light from dogwood trees. The breeze carried the faintest scent of honeysuckle. I walked 2 blocks before I realized. I felt okay. Then I jogged. 1 block. 2. By the 3rd, my breathing picked up, but there was no tightness, no stabbing in my chest, no lightheaded spell creeping in. Just breath. Rhythm. A cadence I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I stopped at the end of the street, hands on hips, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel that breath deeper. No chest pain, just air, just life. Later that week, Odette drove me across town to the Savannah Arts Council's main gallery. They were hosting a community exhibit titled Reclaim. The director had reached out after seeing my story online. She'd asked if I had any pieces I wanted to show. I hesitated at first, but eventually I offered one, Not Forgotten. A mixed media portrait I'd created after the hospital, inspired by my grandmother's words. A woman's silhouette, stitched together by broken glass and pencil lines, with the words, Still Here, etched in the lower right corner. The director hung it at the entrance. Beneath it, a small plaque read, Artist, Indigo, Marlowe. I stood there for almost 20 minutes, just watching people stop in front of it. Some looked confused, some moved on, but one woman, middle-aged, in scrubs, her name tag reading Darlene, stood longer than most. Her hand went to her chest. She whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but her eyes said enough. That night, I received an email from my old high school's guidance counselor. They were updating a hallway dedicated to wellness and inclusion. Would I mind if they printed and framed a version of Not Forgotten to hang near the school's anti-bullying campaign? I said yes, and I cried then. A little. Quietly. 2 weeks later, I recorded an episode for a trauma recovery podcast. The host asked thoughtful, careful questions. Near the end, she said, If there's one thing you'd say to your younger self now, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. I don't forgive them, I said softly, but I forgive me for believing I deserved their silence. That clip went viral. Not millions of views viral, but enough. Enough for people to write, to reach out, to say, me too. The day of my final hospital checkup, Odette picked me up in her old Subaru. She didn't make it a big deal, just handed me a to-go coffee, asked if I'd brought my insurance card, and waited while I checked my phone for the umpteenth time. The appointment was fast, no lingering issues, my oxygen levels were strong. The doctor said I looked better than your file implies. I smiled at that. As we walked back to the car, I slipped my arm through Odette's without thinking. She didn't react, just walked alongside me down to the riverfront path, the one near the park with the fountain I used to stare at as a kid. We didn't talk much, just walked, hand in hand. My chest didn't ache, my legs didn't shake. I wasn't anyone's shadow anymore. They said I was dramatic. They said I was fragile. They said I should be quiet. I said nothing until now. Sometimes the loudest act of strength is choosing to walk away, especially from those who only love you in silence. Indigo's story reminds us, being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and when no one believes you, documenting your truth might be the bravest thing you can do. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Tell me in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are more real, raw stories coming your way. Hello? My name's Capri. Last fall, I came home early from a work trip. No warning, just a storm and instinct. What I found still haunts me. My blind grandmother, soaked, trembling, was left outside like she didn't belong, her cane tossed in a puddle. Inside, laughter, champagne, the scent of my father's new wife's perfume filling the house like poison masked as air freshener. They said she wandered. But the chair missing from the dinner table? That wasn't an accident. They erased her one comfort at a time, her photo, her seat, even her medicine. And my father, he sipped champagne as if he didn't know. But he knew. And I stayed. I stayed to fight. What kind of family does that to their own? And why was no one else saying a word? The rain didn't let up for a second as I turned off the freeway and onto our old neighborhood street in Santa Rosa. My windshield wipers were working overtime, smearing the storm more than clearing it. The sky looked like it had something to say and wasn't going to stop yelling until it was heard. I hadn't planned to come home that night. Work in San Diego had wrapped early, and I thought I'd surprise them. Dad, Isolde, and Grandma. God, I had no idea. It was supposed to be a quiet visit. I didn't even call. Just packed up after the meeting, drove up north, and figured I'd show up on the porch like I used to in college. But the moment I turned into our driveway, I felt something was wrong. The porch light was off. No motion light flicked on. And there, through the sheets of rain, I saw her. She was huddled near the brick column, her thin frame shaking violently under a soaked cardigan. Her cane lay a few feet away, half submerged in a puddle. I froze. My heart slammed into my ribs like it was trying to get out. My grandmother, outside, in the cold, alone. She didn't see me, of course. She couldn't. But I saw everything. I jumped out of the car, slamming the door harder than I meant to. "Grandma!" I shouted, rushing over. Her head jerked slightly. I could hear her mumbling something. No, praying. Her voice cracked with each word like she was trying to convince herself she hadn't been abandoned. I dropped to my knees beside her, ignoring the water soaking through my jeans. "It's me, Grandma. It's Capri." She gasped when I touched her shoulder, then relaxed just a little as her trembling fingers found my wrist. "Capri?" she whispered, her voice barely there. "Oh, my sweet girl. Is it really you? I'm here. I've got you." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling how cold her skin was, how thin her arms had become since I last saw her. She clung to me like a child, like someone lost in the dark who had finally found a hand to hold. I scooped her up as gently as I could and hurried toward the house. Every step was heavier than the last, not because of her weight, but because of what I was walking into. The moment I opened the door, the sound hit me like a punch. Laughter, jazz music, clinking glasses, warmth, perfume. The house was glowing with soft lights and golden air. The smell of roasted lamb and red wine filled the hall. Inside, it was a celebration, a party, like nothing was wrong, like the storm and my grandmother didn't exist. I carried her through the kitchen. No one even noticed, not at first. Then I stepped into the living room, and all heads turned. Isolde was at the center, in a scarlet dress that clung to her like it was painted on. She held a champagne flute, mid-toast, and gave me that frozen pageant smile she used when pretending to care. "Capri, what a surprise," she cooed. "We didn't expect you until next weekend." I didn't answer. I walked past her, past the man who was once my father, still seated on the couch, raising his glass toward some joke that had died the moment I walked in. I laid Grandma down gently on the couch. Someone had left a throw blanket nearby. I grabbed it and wrapped it around her. "Is she all right?" Isolde asked, suddenly aware of the wet carpet and the woman shivering on her designer upholstery. "She was outside," I said, my voice low, "in the rain." My father turned to me then, slow, like his neck didn't work right anymore. "She must have wandered out. You know how she gets sometimes." "No, Dad." I looked him dead in the eye. "You know how she gets, and you let her." Isolde stepped forward, lips tight. "We thought she went to bed early. We didn't hear her." Too smooth, too quick. Like she had that answer ready. Like this wasn't the first time. I sat down beside Grandma, letting the silence do what my words couldn't. I felt my hands tremble, not from the cold, but from rage. because suddenly everything made sense. The smaller portions at dinner, the separate room, the silence whenever I asked how Grandma was doing. This wasn't neglect, it was strategy. I looked around the room. No one met my gaze. No one asked if she was okay. They were already sliding back into their comfort zones, hoping I wouldn't make a scene. But I saw her cane in that puddle. I remembered the nights she sat by my bedside when I had the flu. The way she saved her Social Security checks to buy me my first laptop for law school. The way her hands never stopped working, even after her vision started to go. And now they had left her outside like a forgotten dog. "She's freezing," I said finally, rising to my feet. No one moved. "You left a blind woman, my grandmother, outside, in a storm, while you toasted to yourself." My father opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't. Just don't." I turned back to Grandma. She was asleep now, or at least pretending to be. Her hands were still trembling beneath the blanket. I sat back down, took her hand in mine, and stared at the champagne bottle in Dad's hand. That was all the proof I needed. They weren't sorry. They weren't even surprised. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. I squeezed Grandma's hand and whispered just loud enough for myself to hear. "They're about to learn what storms really do." The room didn't shift when I said it, when I laid that photo down and told my father exactly what was happening under his own roof. The air didn't go cold. The music didn't stop. The guests didn't gasp. In fact, most of them acted like they hadn't heard a word. Maybe that's what made it worse. The quiet complicity. The way people pretended this wasn't happening right in front of them. I sat back in the corner of the living room, close enough to see everything, far enough to be ignored. My grandmother was still lying under the blanket I had wrapped her in, her eyes closed, lips parted as if the chill had crept into her lungs. Her cardigan clung to her like wet tissue. No one offered a towel, not even Isolde, whose perfume lingered more loudly than her words. Laughter bubbled from the dining room again. The moment had passed, for them. They returned to their wine and their overcooked jokes like nothing had happened. Alaric, my father, settled back into his chair. I could see the crease in his forehead, but he said nothing. A waiter, probably hired for the evening, carried a tray of hors d'oeuvres past me. He didn't make eye contact. None of them did. Then came the moment that made my stomach turn. "We've decided," Isolde announced from the head of the table, "that Nana won't be joining us at the dining table anymore." Her voice was bright, like she was announcing a vacation. Well, she struggles with the cutlery, and the noise makes her anxious, so for her comfort, we'll set her up somewhere quieter. I didn't blink. I didn't move, but inside, I was unraveling. One of the guests chuckled awkwardly, lifting a glass to their lips as if champagne could drown shame. Another shifted in their seat, looking anywhere but at me. "She's not a puppy," I finally said, loud enough for the room to hear. Isolde's eyes locked on mine. "Capri," she said in that tone. Calm, condescending, fake sweet. "It's not about you. No, it's about her, and how you've decided she doesn't belong anymore." "She's just old," Isolde said, with a dramatic shrug. "And habits change." Alaric didn't say a word. I stood up, walked over to the dining room, counted the seats. One was missing. The place where Grandma used to sit, right next to my father, was gone, not moved, removed, like she had never existed there. "She prefers the kitchen," Isolde added with a bright smile. "It's warmer." I didn't respond. I walked to the kitchen. There in the corner, next to the pantry door, sat a small table with a plastic bowl of vegetable soup and a spoon that looked more like cafeteria cutlery than anything I would use in this house. My grandmother was still lying down, too weak to protest. I walked back, took a real fork and knife from the drawer, and placed them on the table in front of her seat in the kitchen. I pulled out a cloth napkin, not a paper one. Then I looked over my shoulder and met Isolde's stare. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Later that night, when most of the guests had left and the noise had softened to murmurs and clinks, I wandered into the living room again. The mantel above the fireplace used to be a shrine to memory, photos of my childhood, my parents' wedding, but most of all, my grandfather. His frame had been the largest, centered, lit perfectly by the sconces on either side. I looked up and saw nothing. In his place now was a framed photo of Alaric and Isolde, dressed in matching navy and ivory, laughing on a yacht. It was clearly recent and intentional. I felt the burn behind my eyes as I stepped closer. I looked around. My grandfather's photo wasn't just moved, it was gone. I searched for it. Not in the trash, not in the drawers. Eventually, I found it tucked behind a stack of Christmas decorations in the hallway cabinet. Dust covered the glass. The frame had a crack in one corner. I sat on the floor with the picture in my lap. My chest felt hollow, like something inside me had cracked along with the frame. This wasn't just about seating arrangements or soup bowls. This was erasure. A quiet, strategic erasure of everything that came before Isolde. My grandfather. My grandmother. Even me. I thought about the times I had sat on Grandpa's lap, listening to him hum Sinatra while flipping through vinyl records. The way he'd sneak me butter cookies from the tin Grandma always said were only for guests. The way this house used to feel like it belonged to someone who loved it. Now, it was a showroom, curated, cold. I got up and went to the kitchen where my father was pouring himself another drink. "Why'd you let her do it?" I asked. He didn't turn. "Do what?" "Remove Grandma from the table, replace Grandpa on the wall. Turn this house into something none of us recognize." He sighed, still not looking at me. "Capri, it's not that serious. Isolde just likes things a certain way." "She erased him, Dad. From the wall, from your table, from your memory." "It's not erasure," he said. "It's change." I stepped closer. "You didn't marry a housekeeper. You married a ghostwriter of your past." He finally looked at me. His face was tired, older than I remembered. But the silence that followed wasn't from age, it was from guilt. I walked away before he could say anything else. My hands were trembling as I passed through the hallway. Back in my room, I placed Grandpa's photo in my overnight bag, zipped it up slowly, then walked back to the kitchen. I didn't speak. I just placed the photo, still dusty, still cracked, right in the middle of the dining table, next to the remnants of their celebration. I looked my father dead in the eye and said, "He built this house. She's tearing it down, one memory at a time." Dad didn't say a word after I placed Grandpa's photo on the dining table. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. I left it there like a gravestone, a reminder that memory still had weight in this house, even if no one else wanted to carry it. The guests had all gone. The only sounds now were the occasional creak of old wood and the quiet hum of the fridge. I couldn't sleep. Not because of the storm outside, it had passed, but because the storm inside me hadn't. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every glance, every evasion, every excuse. My body was still, but my mind wouldn't rest. Sometime around 3, I gave up. The hallway was quiet when I stepped out. The lights dimmed to low night mode. My bare feet touched the hardwood floor, cool and unfamiliar. It didn't feel like home anymore. As I passed the living room, I noticed the throw blanket had slipped off Grandma's lap. She was still resting, but her breathing was light, almost fragile. I gently tucked the blanket back around her shoulders, brushed a damp curl from her cheek, then moved toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it. The soft clinking of a spoon against porcelain. The kind of sound you might miss unless you were really listening. I paused at the threshold. The light above the stove cast a dull glow over the room. And there she was, my grandmother, sitting at the small table tucked into the corner, stirring a lukewarm cup of tea. Alone. She didn't hear me come in. She was humming to herself, a quiet, broken tune. I recognized it. "The Way You Look Tonight." One of Grandpa's favorites. I leaned against the doorframe and just watched her. The air in the room felt heavier somehow. Not cold, just still. Like the house was holding its breath. That moment broke me. 6 months earlier, during a quick weekend visit, I remembered stumbling upon her in this same kitchen. Back then, it didn't strike me the same way. She had been sitting beside the laundry room door, hunched over a bowl of stew, wearing a soft blue robe. The washing machine had been running. The clatter of zippers and buttons thudding against the drum gave the moment a strange rhythm. I'd asked, "Why aren't you eating with everyone?" Isolde had appeared out of nowhere, smile sharp as ever. "Oh, she likes the quiet. It helps her digestion." At the time, I believed her. Now, in this still kitchen at 3 a.m., I realized that what I had taken for kindness was just convenience disguised as care. "She likes the peace," Isolde had said. But peace shouldn't look like isolation. Peace shouldn't taste like cold stew in the shadows. I stepped inside, quietly pulled a chair back, and sat across from her. She looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Couldn't sleep either?" I shook my head. "Not a wink." She nodded knowingly and kept stirring her tea, though she hadn't taken a sip. Her hands were steady tonight, not always the case these days. We didn't say much, I didn't want to rush her, but guilt sat between us, heavier than any silence. "I should have asked more questions," I finally said. She tilted her head, confused. "About what?" "This," I gestured around us. "All of it. The separate dinners, the moved photos, the rules." Her expression didn't change, but her hands stopped moving. "There are things you let slide when you don't want to make trouble," she said softly. "Then one day you realize the whole floor's tilted, and you're the only one trying to stand straight." I looked at her, really looked. Not just as my grandmother, but as someone who had quietly endured so much and asked for so little. That's when the memory hit me. Christmas. Just last year. The house had been full. Isolde had thrown one of her signature events, catered meal, fine china, white linens. Everyone was dressed up, laughter bouncing off the walls. At one point, Isolde had handed Grandma a list. "Would you do the honors of announcing our guests?" she asked sweetly, holding out the note card like it was a prize. Grandma hesitated. "I don't see so well anymore." "Nonsense," Isolde had said. "You'll do just fine." She stood at the front of the room, squinting at the card. Mr. and Mrs. Lang?" She stumbled. "Mr. B. Baxton?" The crowd chuckled, lightly, at first, but it grew. Each mistake a little louder, a little funnier. Capri from last year had clapped along, mortified but frozen. I hadn't defended her. I hadn't stopped it. And now here we were, alone in a kitchen of ghosts. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. "You don't have to earn your space in this house. Not with perfect pronunciation, not with silence, not with anything." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know," she whispered, but I knew she didn't. That night, I started making lists. Little things, times, places, patterns. I pulled out old photo albums, noted changes in decor. I searched drawers for receipts, handwritten notes, post-its, any hint of how long this had been going on. There was a pattern to this, a quiet replacement of presence with absence. Later, while folding some of Grandma's laundry, I found an old sticky note tucked inside a drawer. The ink had faded, but I could still read the words. "Don't forget, Alaric said to never touch Isolde's side of the fridge." That was the moment the shame turned to fire. I held that note like a piece of evidence, and maybe it was. Because this wasn't about misplaced affection or shifting dynamics anymore. It was about power. Quiet, insidious power. The kind that doesn't scream, but rewrites the rules when no one's looking. I stood in the hallway, listening to the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. My reflection in the mirror looked back, eyes tired, heart steady. How many rules are written just for her? I said to no one, but I was done being silent. The sticky note was still in my hand when the morning light began to creep through the cracks of the hallway blinds. I hadn't slept. My body was tired, but my mind couldn't settle, not after everything I'd pieced together in just a few hours. That single line, scrawled in faded ink, "Don't forget, Alaric said to never touch Isolde's side of the fridge," felt less like a reminder and more like a warning. I tucked the note into my back pocket and made my way to the dining room. The smell of eggs and onions hit me before I even rounded the corner. Isolde was already bustling around the kitchen in one of her silk robes, hair pulled into a perfect bun, as if she'd woken up camera-ready. She didn't acknowledge me, just continued flipping an omelet with performative grace. "Good morning," she chirped without turning around. I didn't reply. At the table, Alaric sat reading the newspaper, an actual physical copy, folded neatly like he was clinging to the one tradition Isolde hadn't redesigned. He didn't look up either. And there, placed near the far end of the table, was a small plastic tray with a banana and a dry slice of toast. Grandma sat in front of it, hunched, eyes down, quietly chewing. Her chair was pushed away from the table, isolated. She wasn't part of the breakfast conversation, if there had been one. I stood behind her for a moment, then quietly slid a real plate in front of her, swapped the toast, and added a warm slice of the omelet from the skillet. Isolde glanced over her shoulder, saw what I was doing, and narrowed her eyes. "She said she's not hungry," she offered, voice sharp and saccharine all at once. "Then she can decide that herself," I answered. Alaric turned a page of the newspaper, as if it had suddenly become the most captivating thing in the world. I sat down across from Grandma and noticed something else. Her wrist was bare. The emergency call button she always wore, the one she pressed when she needed help with the stairs or had a dizzy spell, was missing. "Grandma," I said softly, "where's your alert?" She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the kitchen, then down again. "It stopped working," she murmured. "I didn't want to bother anyone." Something tightened in my chest. "When did it stop working?" She hesitated again. "I don't know. A few days ago?" I stood up, left the table, and went straight to the drawer where she usually kept her things. The alert device was there, intact, clean, but light as a feather. And I turned it over, opened the back. Empty. No batteries. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I simply walked past the kitchen, past Isolde, past Alaric, and straight to the study. I found what I needed, a fresh pack of AA. Back in the kitchen, I slid the batteries in and tested the device. It beeped to life. I looked up and met Alaric's gaze. "She didn't even know it wasn't working, because you didn't tell her." He blinked. "What?" "You took the batteries out." "I didn't." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, louder than I intended. Isolde walked over, hand on her hip. "Capri, what's this about?" "This device is what she presses when she falls, or feels dizzy, or needs help," I said, holding it up. "And someone made sure it didn't work." "She hardly uses it," Alaric said quietly. "That's not an answer," I replied. "That's an excuse." The room went still. Grandma had stopped eating. "I'm not doing this here," Alaric muttered, standing up and heading for the hallway. "Good," I said. "Then let's do it somewhere else." I followed him to his study. When he sat down behind his desk, I closed the door behind me. "You know what's happening, don't you?" I asked, voice low. He said nothing. "You see it, the way she talks to Grandma, the rules, the separation, the silence." "She keeps things in order," he replied, almost defensively. "At what cost?" His eyes flicked away. "She makes things manageable," he said. "For you?" I leaned in. "Or for her?" Alaric sighed. "Your mother used to cry every day. Isolde keeps me calm." I felt my stomach drop. "Calm?" I repeated. "You call this calm? Ignoring your mother until she stops asking for help? Letting someone you married treat her like she's in the way?" He didn't respond. "She's erasing her, Dad. Erasing everything that came before, and you're letting her do it." He rubbed his temples. "Capri, you don't understand how hard this has been." "No," I said. "You don't understand how easy it's been. For you." The room was quiet for a long beat. I could feel myself shaking, but I held it together. "You think silence is peace," I said. "But silence is what breaks people." He looked up slowly, eyes tired. "I didn't mean for any of this. But it's happening, and it stops now." I stood, pulled a small notebook from my bag and placed it on the desk. "I'm documenting everything. I love you, Dad, but I'm not afraid of what happens next." I left before he could answer. Later that day, I found Grandma in the kitchen again. She was washing dishes, alone. The sink was full of cold water. Her hands were pink from the temperature. The faucet was barely dripping, the way she liked it. Quiet, manageable. She didn't complain. She never did. I took a towel from the counter and dried her hands gently. She looked up at me with that same tired smile she always wore. Half apology, half surrender. "You don't have to earn your place in this house," I whispered. She didn't reply, but she leaned into my hand just a little. That night, while everyone else pretended nothing had changed, I retrieved the emergency bell and placed fresh batteries inside. I tested it twice. Then I secured it to Grandma's wrist, kissed her forehead, and tucked her into bed. Before I left the room, I walked back into the kitchen and stood under the small black camera mounted above the fridge, a security measure Isolde insisted on for the household staff. I stared straight into it, let my face fill the screen, let her see me. Let her know I was done pretending. Let's see what they do now. The hallway lights flickered once before going completely dark, and I knew, without even checking, that the power to Grandma's room had been cut. I headed straight for the basement, heart hammering harder with each step. The breaker box stood just as I remembered it, old, dented, and covered in a thin layer of dust. I scanned the switches. Only one had been flipped. Her room. I flipped it back on, the sound clicking like a trigger. Then I stood there for a long second, staring at the switch, wondering who had done it, and why. But deep down, I didn't need an answer. I already knew. When I returned upstairs, the house was still. I checked Grandma's room. She was curled up peacefully under the blanket I'd tucked in earlier. The emergency bell blinked steadily on her wrist. At least that part was safe again. But everything else? Everything else was war now. The next morning, I woke up feeling a little more tired than usual, but also sharper, more focused. It was like my brain had stopped asking for permission to be angry. I moved with purpose, brushed my teeth, tied my hair back, skipped breakfast. I needed to check something. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet where Grandma kept her medicine. I counted the bottles, 3 prescriptions, one for blood pressure, one for heart rhythm, and one missing. No. Wait, it wasn't missing. It was right there, just nearly empty. I pulled it out, turned it in my hand. The refill date was recent, less than 2 weeks ago, yet the bottle only had a few pills left. I found Grandma in the sunroom, half asleep in the recliner. She looked peaceful, but pale. Too pale. "Grandma?" I said softly, kneeling beside her. "Have you been taking your meds regularly?" She opened her eyes, blinking into the light. "I think so," she whispered. "Isolde said the doctor changed the dosage." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then added, "She said I don't need as much anymore." She talked to the pharmacy. I didn't say a word. I just kissed her forehead and walked out the door, keys in hand. The pharmacist on Main Street remembered me from high school. He gave me a sad smile when I showed him the bottle and asked for the refill history. "This refill came from an online request," he said, checking the system. "From the account linked to your father's number, caretaker authorization." I nodded slowly. "What was the dosage change?" He glanced at the screen, then looked up at me, eyebrows raised. "Half the original strength. Started with this last refill." I thanked him and walked back to my car. I didn't turn the engine on right away. I just sat there, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular, trying to decide whether my heart was pounding from fury or fear. She had changed Grandma's prescription. Legally? Maybe. Ethically? Not even close. And medically? Flat out dangerous. On the way home, I pulled over and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. Laura Morales, our old housekeeper. She picked up on the second ring. "Capri?" Her voice cracked a little, like someone surprised to hear from a ghost. "Hi, Laura. I know it's been a while, but can I ask you something?" There was a pause. "Of course." "I need to know why you left. Why you really left." Another pause. A breath. "She told you I quit, didn't she?" I waited. "I didn't. Isolde fired me." "Why?" "I helped your grandma get dressed every morning. She said I was making her too dependent. That she needed to learn her limits, I guess. She didn't like that I still treated her like she mattered. I swallowed. Do you remember when that was? Last fall, right after your dad's birthday. I thanked her. Before she hung up, she added, she didn't say it outright, but she wanted your grandma to feel like a burden. That much was clear. I ended the call and tapped record on my phone, capturing everything I could remember that Laura had said. Then I emailed it to myself, time-stamped, saved. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I wasn't even pretending to be calm anymore. Isolde was in the garden, pruning hydrangeas like nothing in the world could touch her. Alaric sat in a lawn chair nearby, sipping his coffee, watching her like she was a painting that might disappear if he blinked too hard. I walked right over to them. Can we talk? I said. Isolde turned, smiling like always. Capri, you don't have to sound so formal. We're family. Then let me speak like family, I said. If you touch one more bottle of Grandma's meds, one more, your name is going to show up in a court report under elder abuse. Alaric shifted in his seat. Isolde's smile didn't budge. You're upset, she said smoothly. I understand. No, I said. You don't. You understand control. You understand optics. But you don't understand the damage you're doing. Or maybe you do, and that's worse. Alaric looked at me, unsure of which side to stand on. I didn't change anything without speaking to the pharmacist, she said. That's a lie, I said plainly. And I have the call log to prove it. Silence stretched for several seconds. Alaric opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. No more justifying, no more excuses. If I see one more pill missing, one more light switched off, one more accident, I'm going straight to the authorities. You don't have to believe me. You just have to try me. I walked away before she could respond. That night, Grandma reached for my hand while I tucked her in. I thought you'd leave, she whispered, like the others. I'm not the same person I used to be, I said. I see things now. She smiled faintly. That's good. You'll need strong eyes, child. In this house, truth gets hidden behind nice curtains. I kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. Then, quietly, I walked to my room, pulled up her medical chart from the hospital portal, and printed the full dosage history. I highlighted the original prescription, then the altered version. I taped the paper beside her mirror. She will not fade on my watch, I whispered. I barely closed my laptop that night when the room lights flickered and then died. Only her room. Again. I grabbed the flashlight, made my way to the basement, and flipped the switch. Same breaker, same damn switch, deliberately flipped. I turned it back on and stood there in the glow of the utility light, breathing hard. So they want war. After resetting the breaker that night, I sat on the edge of Grandma's bed and watched her chest rise and fall in slow, steady rhythm. Her hands rested gently over the blanket, the emergency bell on her wrist blinking like a lighthouse in the dark. She didn't know what had happened. She didn't know someone had cut the power to her room. But I did, and whoever did it wasn't trying to scare her. They were trying to silence her. The next morning, I woke early. The house was still asleep. The air was thick with that morning quiet only old houses seem to hold, like the walls themselves are waiting to see how the day will go before they creak or shift. I made coffee, black, bitter, no sugar, exactly how I needed it. Then I walked down the hallway, bypassing the kitchen, past the sunroom, and into the back office. The one Dad had turned into his project room after retirement. Isolde rarely went in there, claimed it smelled like books and too many men. The file cabinet was old, stubborn, but I knew the rhythm. 2 shakes, then pull. The bottom drawer squeaked as it opened. Inside were stacks of manila folders, decades of home insurance renewals, bank records, warranty receipts, and, exactly what I hoped for, copies of the house deed. I pulled out the latest one and sat at the desk. The ink was crisp, the format looked official, but something felt off. The original deed, dated back to 1984, listed the owners as Thomas and Margaret Langston, my grandparents. After Grandpa died, the property had been updated to include Margaret Langston solely. That was what I expected. What I didn't expect was the revision dated 6 months ago, listing the current owners as Alaric Langston and Isolde Langston. Margaret's name was gone. No transfer of title, no will, no signature from Grandma anywhere. I grabbed my phone and opened the county's public record site. After 15 minutes of searching, it was there, filed electronically on a weekday morning, right before noon. I opened my Notes app and began building a timeline. Cross-referencing events. Grandma's medication reduced, Laura fired, photos moved, the bell deactivated, and now this, her name erased from the deed. This wasn't random. This was a system. I closed the drawer quietly and slipped the folder into my bag. On my way back to my room, I passed by Grandma's door. I paused, hand on the knob, but didn't go in. She deserved peace, at least for a few more hours. Back in my room, I placed the folder on the bed and stared at it, my hands shaking for the first time since this started. I needed something more, something that couldn't be brushed off as misunderstood paperwork. I started going through Grandma's things, not to invade, but to understand. I looked through drawers, flipped through old notebooks, hoping for something, anything, that might give this mess a voice. That's when I found the small voice recorder tucked into the back of her nightstand drawer. I clicked play, expecting reminders or recipes. Instead, I heard laughter. Isolde's voice, clear as day. I swear, one wrong step on those stairs and she's out of our lives. A pause, then a friend's voice. You didn't? Another laugh. I didn't have to. She's already so slow. One gentle nudge from gravity, and this whole thing fixes itself. I froze. The room spun. I replayed the clip 3 times just to be sure. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't just talk. It was malice wrapped in a joke, delivered with a laugh, the kind that's only funny to people who think they're untouchable. By afternoon, I was sitting across from a lawyer in a modest office downtown. He was around my age, wore a loosened tie, and had the energy of someone who'd been through enough to not ask, "Are you sure?" when presented with truth. I laid it all out. The altered deed, the medication records, the recorded call with Laura, and now the voice recording. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When I was done, he tapped a pen against his notebook. "This isn't just unethical," he said finally. "This is criminal." I exhaled. Back home, I placed printed copies of everything into a large envelope, labeled clearly in black ink. Proof. Then, during breakfast the next morning, I walked into the dining room where my father sat eating toast like the world hadn't shifted under his feet. I placed the envelope in front of him. He didn't open it right away. "What's this?" he asked. "Truth," I said. "And a decision." He stared at it. "You either stop protecting her," I continued, "or I start protecting Grandma. In court." Alaric didn't respond. His hand hovered above the envelope like it might burn him. "Do you really think it's come to that?" he asked. I stared at him, deadpan. "No. I think it came to that a long time ago. I'm just catching up." Before he could say more, Isolde walked in, holding a mug like a stage prop. Her robe was silk, her smile even silkier. "Coffee too bitter today, Capri?" she asked, smug. I didn't blink. "You should start practicing silence. You'll need it where you're going." The smile slipped from her lips just for a moment, but it was enough. I picked up my phone, swiped open the screen. A new message had arrived. It was from the county clerk. The preview read, "The deed alteration was submitted with a forged signature. Investigating further." I sat down at the table, eyes locked on Isolde, and whispered to myself, just loud enough to be heard. This is where they start falling. I didn't even flinch as I read the message. Just stood there at the edge of the dining room, watching Isolde pour herself another glass of that overpriced white wine she always kept chilled just for appearances. Alaric had stepped out back earlier to water the same tomato plants he rarely ate from. The ones Isolde insisted looked picturesque near the patio furniture. I took a slow breath and turned away from the phone screen. And my hands didn't shake this time. That phase had passed. Now it was precision, measured, deliberate. I walked down the hall, back into the guest room I'd been staying in since returning. Sunlight was just starting to creep in through the blinds. Grandma was still asleep in her room across the hall. For once, her sleep looked peaceful. I opened the bottom drawer of the tall dresser, the one with the loose handle, and reached inside. I pulled out the old record sleeve I'd tucked away a few years ago, back when I'd helped pack Grandpa's things after he passed. It had always felt odd to keep vinyl records in a guest room, but that one album, his favorite jazz record, had never been moved, almost like he was still guarding something in there. And he was. Behind the cardboard insert, sealed in a yellowing envelope, was a folded document I'd never opened. The seal wasn't broken. My name was handwritten on the front in his careful, steady penmanship. For the one who never left her side. I sat down on the edge of the bed and peeled the flap open with both dread and hope bubbling inside me. The paper inside was crisp, neatly folded in thirds. It wasn't just a letter. It was a will. Dated. Notarized, legal, and it named me, Capri Langston, as the sole beneficiary and rightful heir to the house. I stared at the signature, tears threatening but not falling. He had known that one day someone might try to rewrite the story, and he'd left this behind like a lighthouse for me to find when the fog got too thick. By mid-morning, I was sitting in the district attorney's office downtown. I handed over the envelope along with copies of everything else I'd compiled: the forged deed, audio recordings, prescription documents, the timeline I'd built down to the hour. The clerk at the front desk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense bun, skimmed the paperwork and raised an eyebrow. "You compiled this yourself?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She took a long pause before responding. "This is going to the top. You did everything right." Back home, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It wasn't triumph, not yet, but it was something sturdier than fear. That night, I asked Dad and Isolde to join me for dinner. No guests, no party trays, just us. I cooked, not to impress them. God knows I had no interest in that. But because it kept my hands busy. Grandma sat quietly at the head of the table, her posture straighter than usual. She was wearing a deep blue shawl I hadn't seen her wear in years. I laid the table as it used to be. Linen napkins, full settings, no plastic in sight. When Isolde walked in, she immediately frowned. "You've been busy." I didn't answer, just gestured for her to sit. Dad followed her in, slower. His eyes avoided mine. We started with silence and soup. It was something Grandma had taught me to make. Chicken with dill and lemon. The room stayed hushed until the bowls were nearly empty. Then I cleared my throat. "I found the original deed," I said simply. Isolde paused mid-sip. "The one Grandpa had notarized. The one naming me as heir to this house." Alaric looked up sharply. "You did what?" I reached into the side drawer and pulled out the framed copy I had prepared earlier, sliding it gently across the table. "I also submitted it to the district attorney, along with the falsified document you filed in Grandma's name, Isolde." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "And the dosage manipulation records, the recording of your conversation in the kitchen, and a statement from Laura." Isolde's face contorted. "This is overreach. You don't understand the law." I met her gaze, unwavering. "I wrote my thesis on it." Silence. Alaric looked like he'd been struck. He reached for the wine glass, missed, and let his hand fall uselessly to his lap. Isolde's hands clenched. Then she stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "I won't be spoken to like this in my own house." "It's not your house," I said. She glared at me, breathing hard. "I kept this place running. You think just because you have a piece of paper you're suddenly in charge?" "No. I think the law says I am." Isolde let out a sharp sound, half scoff, half growl, and hurled her wineglass across the room. It shattered against the wall, the liquid trailing down like blood on paint. Nobody moved. She stormed out, her heels clicking like gunfire on the tile. I turned to Dad. He was staring at the floor. "You didn't fail me," I said quietly. "You failed her." I gestured toward Grandma, who sat still, silent, but with a tiny smile forming at the corner of her mouth. Later that week, news spread. A small article on the local paper's website. Then a Facebook post from one of Grandma's old church friends. Then more calls, neighbors, family members we hadn't heard from in years. Messages of support, of disbelief, of apology. Isolde was suspended from her event planning firm pending internal investigation. Her name appeared in an ethics complaint. Alaric didn't respond when the neighborhood association removed him from the board. And me? I sat alone in the kitchen one afternoon, holding the original deed in my hands. I looked around, at the place where Grandpa used to drink coffee, at the chair Grandma had been banished from, at the walls that had watched everything happen in silence. Then I walked to the living room, placed the document in a new frame, and set it on the mantel. "She won't just live here," I whispered. "She'll be honored here." The court date came faster than I expected. Or maybe my body had been running on survival mode for so long, I didn't realize how quickly everything was catching up. That morning, I sat beside Grandma on a wooden bench just outside courtroom 204. She wore her navy coat with the pearl buttons and a floral scarf that had once belonged to her sister. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Mine couldn't stay still. When they called our case, I didn't feel nervous, just steady, focused, like I'd finally found the ground beneath me after weeks of walking on ice. The judge was an older man with deep grooves between his brows, the kind of man who'd seen too much to be easily moved. But as the charges were read, fraudulent deed modification, medical manipulation, elder neglect, the stillness in the room shifted. Isolde sat 2 rows ahead, back straight, lips pressed together like a child waiting to be scolded. She never looked my way. I kept my hand on Grandma's arm as the judge delivered the findings. "There is substantial evidence of misconduct," he said, voice even. While the court refrains from passing criminal sentence at this time, the defendant, Isolde Langston, is hereby sentenced to 600 hours of mandatory community service at Rosewood Senior Care Center. Additionally, the court recognizes the revocation of her professional credentials until further review. The room stayed quiet, but I could feel it, the weight of justice beginning to press down. As we left the courtroom, cameras waited outside, not a media circus, just 2 local reporters, one holding a microphone with the channel number duct taped to the side. I didn't stop to speak. I wasn't interested in making it a spectacle. This was about Grandma, not headlines. That afternoon, Isolde's suspension became public. Her company's website removed her photo by sundown. A neighborhood post circulated, half gossip, half outrage, listing her name alongside the words "under investigation." Her client base shrank within 48 hours. Funny how fast people scatter when image cracks. As for Alaric, the judge didn't convict him, but he didn't leave unscathed. "Given your documented detachment from financial and household decisions," the judge said, "this court recommends immediate psychiatric evaluation and legal reassignment of all property and asset management responsibilities." He didn't argue. He didn't even speak. Outside the courthouse, he walked beside me in silence. For a brief moment, he reached for my arm. "I didn't know," he said. I stopped. "No," I replied. "You didn't ask." He nodded like someone hearing something too late. We returned home just after 4. The late afternoon light poured through the windows, casting long shadows on the polished wood floors. Grandma stepped through the front door, really stepped through it, for the first time in months. No side entrance, no back hallway, just the front, where she belonged. She paused in the foyer, taking in the scent of lemons and dust. The house looked almost new. Not because of renovations, but because the weight had shifted. The air felt lighter. I placed her walker in front of her and held out my arm. Together, we walked slowly down the hallway. When we passed the living room, she stopped. Her eyes, what was left of her vision, sought the fireplace mantel. The photo was there. Grandpa in his army dress uniform, standing tall, eyes kind, frame polished and clean. She touched my arm. "He's home again," she whispered. That night, after Grandma had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a mug of tea I never touched. The house was silent, but not in that eerie, controlled way it used to be. This silence felt like exhale. I opened my purse and pulled out the court receipt, confirmation of deed reissuance and legal ownership. Next to it was a folded piece of construction paper. Crayoned words scrawled across the front. Grandma's house. I had made it when I was 6. Grandpa had kept it in his desk drawer for years. I looked at both papers, the child's drawing and the state-issued confirmation, and finally, my tears came. Not the kind that choke you, the kind that clean. In the days that followed, support came from unexpected corners. A letter from our former neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, arrived in the mailbox. I remember the way she used to prune her roses. She deserves better. So do you. An email from one of Dad's old students. You taught me to question everything. I hope you're proud of your daughter for doing just that. Even Laura, our housekeeper, stopped by one morning with a Tupperware full of tamales and tears in her eyes. I watched too much for too long, she said. But you did something. I pinned every note, every card, every printed email to the side of the fridge, right below Grandma's calendar and her magnet that said, God sees everything, and so do I. Then one evening, just as the sun began to dip behind the cypress trees, Grandma and I sat outside on the porch swing. The breeze was soft. The garden smelled like basil and hydrangeas. She reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. I thought I lost this house, she said. I looked at her, my voice quiet but steady. No, Grandma, and I won't let anyone forget that again. The morning after our conversation on the porch, I found myself awake before the sun. I didn't reach for my phone. No email to check, no court date to prep for, just the stillness of a house no longer holding its breath. I walked down the hallway barefoot, the wooden floor creaking under my steps in a way that felt familiar, even welcoming. In the kitchen, the windows were open slightly. A light breeze carried the scent of rosemary from the garden. I boiled water for tea, 2 cups like always. I didn't even have to call Grandma. She appeared like clockwork, wrapped in her flannel shawl, her walker gliding slowly beside her. She took her seat at the table, the same one she'd been denied for so long, and placed both hands gently around the mug I handed her. The sunlight reached across the dining room, catching the edge of Grandpa's photo on the mantel. I watched as the glass reflected the light back into the room like a quiet nod from him. On the radio, an old jazz standard played faintly. All the Things You Are, his favorite, ours now. Neither of us spoke for a while. We didn't need to. Mid-morning, I turned my attention to the pantry. Months of chaos had turned it into a place where only Isolde knew the rules. Spices shoved behind vitamins, duplicate cans, expired soup. I cleared every shelf, reorganized by texture, shape, and touch. Then I labeled each row in Braille: sugar, rice, salt, flour. The fridge was next. I peeled off the passive-aggressive notes Isolde had once used to train everyone. You'd think it was a break room and a soulless office, not a family kitchen. Clean up after yourself. Don't move the filtered pitcher. No dairy past Tuesday. I tossed them all. We'd also hired someone new. A woman named Clarissa. She came by 3 mornings a week, gentle, thorough, and called Grandma ma'am, with the kind of respect that didn't feel forced. She asked questions, listened to answers, and laughed without sounding like she needed an audience. She didn't hover, didn't rearrange the house. She fit. That afternoon, I found a quiet moment to write in my journal. I hadn't opened it in weeks, not since the storm that started all this. I flipped to a blank page and began scribbling thoughts without filtering them. Justice doesn't erase pain. It just gives it somewhere to go. I paused, stared at the sentence. It was true. I had done everything the law allowed me to do. But healing wasn't about watching someone else be punished. It was about claiming what was rightfully ours and protecting it relentlessly. I'd carried a lot of guilt when I first came home, about the things I hadn't seen, the things I'd allowed to go unsaid, but I wasn't that woman anymore, the one who let her voice get buried under civility, the one who waited for the right moment that never came. Now, I knew better. Around 3, I stepped outside to prune the hydrangeas. The summer heat had finally softened. As I clipped dead blooms, I spotted a woman walking down the sidewalk in a community service vest. She carried a trash bag in one hand and a grabber in the other. Her hair was tied up, but I knew the walk, the way her shoulders slumped with bitterness. Isolde. She didn't see me, or pretended not to, but I saw the way people on the block turned away when she passed. That level of isolation doesn't come from punishment. It comes from consequence. Back inside, I pulled out the letter Dad had sent me a few days earlier. Handwritten. 3 pages. Capri, I won't ask you to forgive me. But I do want to talk. I want to understand how I let things go so far. If you're willing, I'd like to sit with you, not as your father, but as a man who has a lot to learn. I folded the letter again and placed it in the drawer beside the phone. Maybe one day, but not today. Some things take time. Some wounds, even when dressed, still need distance before they stop stinging. Later that evening, I walked down the path to the garden gate, a place I'd avoided for months. The paint was chipped, the hinges squeaked, but it still stood, just like us. I pulled a small plaque from the bag slung over my shoulder. It had taken weeks to design, and I hadn't shown it to anyone but Grandma. This home was built on sacrifice. It will stand in honor. I bolted it into the wood with my own hands. No ceremony. No crowd. Just truth. Planted and permanent. Grandma sat beside me in her rocker, a warm blanket across her lap, her face turned slightly toward the sun. She didn't need to see the plaque. She felt it, the moment, the meaning. "Smells like tomatoes again," she said softly. "Just like when your grandfather used to burn them trying to make sauce." I laughed. "He always said he liked them charred," she smiled. "He just didn't know how to cook." We sat for a long time in that silence, not the heavy kind we'd endured, but the soft kind, the kind that says, "We're here. We're still here." As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting gold across the lawn, I felt it, the shift. The house had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. It wasn't just ours again, it was right. I reached for her hand, and she gave it willingly. Some storms come to destroy, others come to clear the path. This time, I came with the storm, and I stayed to rebuild. Some storms don't just shake the walls, they reveal who stood quietly while the roof caved in. This story wasn't just about inheritance or justice, it was about memory, dignity, and the cost of silence. So I have to ask, if someone in your family was quietly being erased, would you notice? Would you speak up? If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what part hit home the most. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories that aren't just told, they're felt. Hi, my name's Beatrice. 2 months ago, I came home early from work and saw my grandmother on her knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor. Her palms were bleeding, bright red smears across the tile. My stepmother stood over her with a bucket in one hand and a threat in the other. "If you speak, your grandson's ashes vanish." That was the moment I realized something I can't unsee. And couldn't unhear either. They weren't just trying to erase her, they were erasing everything. My father's will, our home, even his memory. But how did we get to this point? How do you sit at dinner with people who drug your grandmother, then tell you to smile for a family photo? Would you have stayed quiet too? Or would you have hit record? It was hotter than usual that morning in Charleston. The kind of sticky, heavy heat that hung in the air like something unspoken. I left the gallery earlier than expected. A client had canceled last minute, and I didn't feel like waiting around to pretend I had anything else to do. I remember pulling into the driveway, the sky too bright, the house too quiet. That's when I felt it. Something was wrong. The front door creaked open under my hand. I stepped inside and immediately noticed it. Silence, except for a soft, wet sound coming from down the hallway. A muffled cough. Then again, scrubbing. I moved slowly, my sandals barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something else. Something metallic. The hallway seemed longer than usual. I stopped just before the kitchen door, heart pounding for reasons I didn't fully understand. I heard it again. Scrubbing. Deliberate. Forced. And then, her voice. "Clean harder. You missed a spot. Do it right or don't do it at all." Isolde. That's when I pushed the door. And froze. There she was. Grandma Eleanor. kneeling in a puddle on the kitchen tile, her hands raw, her palms streaked with blood. A rag clung to her fingers, soaked through with dirty water. Her cotton dress, the one with the tiny blue flowers she wore on Sundays, was soaked at the knees. I stood there like a statue. My legs wouldn't move. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Across from her stood Isolde, immaculate, poised, wearing one of her designer silk blouses like this was just another Tuesday. A gleaming pitcher in her hand. Her heels clicked against the tile as she turned toward me. Her lips curled. "Oh, you're home early." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Eleanor looked up. Her eyes met mine. In them, I didn't see confusion. I saw shame, embarrassment, but not surprise. That broke something in me. Isolde tossed what was left of the water across the floor, and it splashed up over Eleanor's skirt. She barely flinched. "Useless," she muttered. "I told you not to miss that corner." Then, as if she remembered I was standing there, watching, she turned back toward my grandmother and hissed, low and vicious, "You say one word to her, and your grandson's ashes are out with the garbage by morning." My jaw locked. My fists clenched. Still, I didn't move. Everything in me wanted to scream, to lunge at her, to pull my grandmother off that filthy floor and tell Isolde to burn in hell, but I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there. Because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't new. This wasn't a one-time punishment. This wasn't a slip. This was routine. She knew how to kneel. She didn't wince at the bleach. She knew not to cry. That was the worst part. Eleanor bowed her head again and resumed scrubbing. I backed away. Slowly. My feet found the floor. My legs carried me back into the hallway, into the stairs, up to my room. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it like I needed it to hold me upright. And then, just like that, everything started spinning. I remembered her laugh, the way she used to sit at the piano and play, soft and slow, just for me. She'd play while Dad cooked on Sundays, humming along without a care in the world. She used to wear pearls and perfume, and she always sat up straight, no matter how tired she was. She hadn't changed clothes in 3 days. I remembered Isolde before Dad died. Quiet, civil, like she knew she didn't belong and wasn't ready to challenge that fact yet. Then the funeral happened. Then everything changed. Isolde didn't step up to take care of the family. She stepped in like she was claiming a throne. She started moving things, firing people, locking rooms. And Dad's will? Never found. Just a verbal instruction that she now managed everything until the dust settled. Well, the dust never settled. It just buried us. I sat on the edge of my bed, trembling, but not crying. I stared across the room at the framed picture on the wall, Dad, Eleanor, and me standing in front of the piano. I hadn't looked at it in months. Now I couldn't look away. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't do nothing anymore. For a while, I just sat there, frozen, not thinking, not planning. Then I stood up. I reached for my phone. My fingers were cold but steady. I opened the voice recorder app. I didn't know what I'd catch. But I knew one thing for sure. Silence had lasted too long. The morning after I hit record, I found myself staring at the ceiling, eyes wide open long before the sun had fully risen. I hadn't actually slept. Not really. My thoughts had twisted around themselves all night, like vines climbing an iron fence, suffocating any space for rest. By 6:30, I was on my feet. The house was still. No footsteps. No clicking of Isolde's heels. No creak from the guest room door where Cairn occasionally stayed when he wasn't at his condo. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and a faint ticking from the hallway clock. I walked down to the living room, barefoot, careful not to wake anything, especially my fear. There it sat, right on the mantel, perfectly centered like some twisted shrine, the urn that supposedly held my father's ashes. Only I couldn't stop thinking about it. How clean it looked. How sterile. There was no dust, no fingerprints, no wear. Not even a mark from the time I accidentally knocked it with a picture frame during a cleaning day 2 years ago. Back then, I remembered its weight, the way it pressed into my hands like it held something heavy, not just ashes, but memory, legacy. I reached for it slowly, almost expecting it to recoil, but it didn't. It sat there like a well-trained actor in a scene that had been rehearsed one too many times. I held it, too light, way too light. I turned it gently in my hands. No seal, no label from the crematorium, just a generic silver plaque that said, "In loving memory." Nothing about him, not even his name. My breath caught. This didn't feel right. I opened the side cabinet where we kept all the important documents, tax forms, insurance records, funeral paperwork, at least what was left after Isolde's mass reorganization for efficiency. I shuffled through the folders, lips pressed together, fingers tight. And there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. The cremation release form, the one I remembered signing with trembling fingers after we had identified Dad's body. Gone. In its place was a new paper, pristine, printed on thin matte stock. Certificate of memory. It read in bold font, no official seal, no cremation number, just a poetic paragraph about eternal love and light. Bull. My hands trembled, but my spine stiffened. I put everything back exactly as I found it, every sheet in place, every corner aligned. Then I placed the urn back on the mantel like it had never left my hands and walked to the kitchen. Isolde was already there, of course, pouring coffee with that same serene mask she wore like it was made for her. Her lipstick was flawless, her hair pulled back in that lazy, expensive way, half effortless, half cold precision. She glanced up. "Morning." I forced a nod. Opened the fridge, poured myself orange juice just to give my hands something to do. Then I leaned against the counter. "Did the crematorium ever send the second copy of Dad's ashes confirmation?" I asked, as casually as if I were asking about the weather. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even look surprised. "You really ought to stop digging up what's been laid to rest," she said without looking at me. And then she sipped her coffee. Like that closed the conversation. I walked out without responding. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. Back in my room, I pulled a tote bag from my closet, the one I used for grocery runs and yoga classes I never made it to. I wrapped the urn in 2 old scarves and tucked it inside. Then I changed into jeans and a neutral sweater, something forgettable. I pulled my hair into a loose braid, grabbed sunglasses, and slipped out the back door. The cremation testing center was 2 towns over, near a veterinary lab and across from a gardening supply store. I used my friend Kayla's name on the intake form and paid in cash. The technician, a woman in her early 50s, didn't ask questions. She took the urn, labeled it, and assured me they'd call within 48 hours. That night, I returned home late. I made sure no one saw me slip the bag, now empty, back into the house. The urn went back to its throne on the mantel. The illusion remained intact. I took a long shower, the kind where the water runs hot enough to fog up the mirror and dull your senses, but not enough to wash away what I knew. Around 10:30, I crawled into bed. I pulled the sheets up, turned off the lamp, and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't fear keeping me awake anymore. It was the sick, sharp realization that I might be living in a house built entirely on lies. At some point, I drifted off. Or maybe I just blinked longer than usual. Either way, I heard it. A soft shuffling noise outside my door. Not footsteps. More like a slow drag. Like paper against carpet. I sat up, heart quickening. Then, a pause. A light tap, once, and silence. I waited, counted to 10. Slipped out of bed and crossed the room. A folded sheet of white paper lay just inside the threshold, barely touching the edge of the rug. I picked it up. No name, no handwriting, just typed words in bold block font. "Touch that urn again and you'll be the next to vanish." I stood there for several minutes, paper in hand, pulse steady, not scared, but certain. They knew I was looking. They wanted me to stop. But they didn't know me. Not really. By the time the call came, the rain had already started. It hadn't been a full-on downpour, just a steady, soft tapping on the window panes. The kind of rain that creeps in slowly, without thunder, without drama, Just enough to remind you the sky holds secrets too. I'd spent most of the day pretending to work in my room. A couple of emails, a glance at my sketch pad. But really, all I could think about was that urn. And the note. The number on my phone was unfamiliar. I let it ring twice before answering. "Miss Murnane?" a woman's voice said. "Yes, this is she. This is Susan from the Forensic Cremation Service. You dropped something off a few days ago?" "Yes." My heart thudded once. "I've reviewed the sample personally. I wanted to speak to you directly. What you provided. It wasn't human remains." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "I'm sorry, what?" "It appears to be a mixture of fireplace soot and what might be ground animal bone. There's no traceable DNA left, but it's clear this is not standard cremation ash. I've seen this before, when someone's trying to fake it." She didn't need to say more. The air in my room thickened. I thanked her, ended the call, and stared at the floor. It wasn't him. The man we mourned, whose ashes sat in the middle of the living room like some holy relic, wasn't even in that house. I wasn't crying. It wasn't the kind of grief that broke your heart. It was the kind that broke your trust in every last person you lived with. I didn't want to be inside that house anymore. I grabbed my raincoat and headed toward the basement, not the finished side with the laundry room and extra freezer, but the back half, where my father's old music room still held what Isolde hadn't touched. The piano sat untouched, keys dusty, the stool pushed slightly askew like someone had left in a hurry. I turned on the overhead bulb, its glow yellow and weak, casting long shadows along the concrete floor. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I moved to the bookshelves first, pulling gently at the spines, scanning each shelf. Most were old sheet music and vinyls, some classical, some blues. He used to play on Sunday mornings. I used to dance around the room with a stuffed bear, Eleanor clapping along. That was before Isolde. Near the bottom shelf, wedged behind a stack of photo albums, I saw a plastic envelope. I pulled it free. Inside was a USB stick, labeled in thick black marker, June 6th, for Eleanor only. My hands tightened around it. That was my parents' anniversary. I didn't say anything. I just slipped it into my coat pocket and made my way back upstairs. I waited until nightfall, when I was sure Isolde was in her room with her glass of wine and Karen was off wherever he always was, and I locked my door. I plugged the USB into my old laptop. There were 2 video files. One was less than a minute long, just a scan of a will, dated 2 weeks before my father's death. It named Eleanor and me as joint heirs, not a word about Isolde. I saved it to the cloud immediately. The second file was longer. My dad sat in the living room, wearing his usual navy sweater. He looked thinner than I remembered. His hands trembled a bit, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, I'm probably gone." I stopped breathing. I made this in case things didn't go the way I hoped. I know Isolde has charm. I know she knows how to say the right thing to the right people. But Beatrice, you were always the light Sarah left with me. You see through the noise. That's what scared her. He paused, blinked slowly. "Don't let them erase you, or your grandmother. You hear me? Don't let them turn you into a guest in your own life." The screen shook a little, like he adjusted the camera himself. "And if they come for everything, remember the password, 05 Eleanor June." The video ended there. I sat in silence for a long time, not crying, just sitting, absorbing the weight of what I now knew. Eventually, I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and crept down the hallway toward my father's old study. The room had been locked for months. Isolde claimed it was under reorganization, but the key was still where he always kept it, tucked in the back of a book titled Trust's Estates. I unlocked the door and entered. The air smelled of dust and wood polish. Against the wall stood the old safe, brown, metal, with a spinning combination dial, but next to it, just under the baseboard, was the backup digital lockbox. My dad was cautious like that. I typed in the code, 05 Eleanor, June. The light turned green. The door unlatched. Inside was nothing. No folders, no documents. Just a half-burned photograph of me and Dad at the piano, and a ripped envelope addressed to B. I dropped to my knees. Everything else had been taken. "Should have stayed a good girl," came a voice from behind me. I turned. Isolde stood in the doorway, barefoot, wineglass in hand, robe tied loosely around her waist. "You always did like to snoop. Thought I wouldn't notice?" I didn't answer. She walked over, picked up the photo with 2 fingers, held it to the light. "Do you know how easy it is to make people forget? All it takes is silence, a few signatures, a couple of favors." "You switched his ashes," I said quietly. She looked at me like I'd told her the weather. "What a dramatic thing to say." I stood up, closed the safe. "You don't get to rewrite him." She smirked, leaned closer. "Sweetheart, I already did." She walked out, still holding the photograph. I didn't follow her. I stared at the piano in the corner of the study. It hadn't been played in years. I ran my hand across the top, fingers brushing dust and faded wood. One of the keys stuck out slightly. I pressed it. No sound. I lifted the fallboard and peered inside. There, nestled inside the piano frame, taped beneath the fallboard, was a small metal flash drive. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, "Dad always said the music held everything." Sometimes, music hides more than memory. Sometimes it hides the truth. I stared at the little flash drive for a long time before plugging it into my laptop. The casing was scratched, almost rusty at the edges, clearly hidden for years. I sat at my desk, lights off, only the soft hum of my computer and the echo of rain tapping the glass outside to accompany me. The first file was a video. It opened with the familiar shape of my younger self, barely a teenager, hunched over the old upright piano in the den. My fingers hesitated on the keys, unsure, as Dad sat beside me, nodding gently, Grandma Eleanor standing behind us with her hand resting softly on my shoulder. I could hear Dad's voice in the background, coaching me, not just in music, but in patience. "You don't have to be perfect, Bea, just honest." The camera panned slightly, catching Eleanor's smile, quiet, proud, the kind only grandmothers carry when they believe in you before you believe in yourself. The second file was a scan of something far less nostalgic, a legal document, a draft will. It was dated just 2 weeks before Dad's death. My name and Eleanor's were typed clearly at the top, joint beneficiaries. Nothing about Isolde, no mention of Cairn. I checked the metadata. The file hadn't been edited. It was real. The air in my lungs left me in a long, uneven exhale. I saved it to 3 places: cloud, external drive, and a secure folder in my email. I wasn't going to let this one disappear. By the time I rejoined the household for dinner that night, my thoughts were louder than the clinking of silverware. The dining table had its usual players: Eleanor, silent and small in her chair, barely lifting her fork; Isolde, poised at the head like she'd always belonged there; and Cairn, across from me, acting like he hadn't just abandoned the very bloodline that raised him. Halfway through a spoonful of mashed potatoes, he looked up and said casually, "Mom, should I bring the car around for tomorrow's appointment?" My fork stopped midair. I turned my head. "What did you just call her?" He blinked once. "I said Mom." Eleanor's hand trembled, her spoon slipping back into the bowl with a small splash. Isolde didn't even hide the smirk. "It's about time he stopped pretending, don't you think?" The room fell into an eerie silence, like a bell had just rung after a funeral. "I didn't know we were pretending," I said flatly. Cairn shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Bea, it's just, she's been more of a mother to me than anyone else." I laughed once. A short, bitter sound. "You were 26 when she married Dad." Isolde sipped her wine. "Blood doesn't always mean family, sweetheart." "No, but betrayal usually does." Her eyes met mine. For the first time, she didn't blink. After dinner, Eleanor and I sat in the back garden. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles and broken leaves. She pulled a small envelope from her sweater pocket and handed it to me. "I wrote this for you. I started it when your father passed," she said, voice barely audible. I wasn't sure when you'd need it." I held it gently, already feeling the weight of her words before reading a single line. "I wanted you to know you've always been the one who stayed, the only one who saw me," she whispered. I kissed her temple and promised I'd read it that night. We sat together for a while, the sky growing darker, the air finally cool. Later, back in the kitchen, I heard the sliding door open. I turned, expecting Eleanor. It was Isolde. She walked straight over, grabbed the envelope from the counter where I'd left it for just a moment, and without saying a word, lit a match. No! I rushed forward, but she was already holding the flame to the paper, letting it burn slowly as it curled and blackened in her manicured fingers. Old people say a lot of things, she said smoothly. Doesn't make it true. I stood there, stunned, watching the ashes fall to the tile like snow that burned. Eleanor entered moments later, saw the remains, and didn't say a word. She just sat down, her shoulders folding in on themselves. I gathered what little was left, the burned edges, the bits that hadn't turned to dust, and placed them in a small dish on the table. She may run this house, I whispered to Eleanor, but she doesn't own what we remember. That night, while the rest of the house slept, I pulled the voice recorder from my drawer. It had dust on it, just like the piano had. I hadn't used it in weeks. But I charged it, reset the file history, and tested the mic twice. Then I placed it under the dining room table, taped to the underside with care. They liked to talk when they thought no one was paying attention. Let's see how they sound when no one's watching. The following morning started quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe but scratches at you, as if the house is holding its breath before a storm. I came downstairs with the same routine I'd repeated every day for weeks. Check the dining room recorder discreetly, make sure the piano flash drive was still hidden, grab coffee, keep my head down. But when I turned the corner to go back up and get dressed, I stopped. My bedroom door was locked. The handle, which normally turned without resistance, was stiff. I tried again. Nothing. I looked down. A cardboard box sat on the floor, flaps folded back. Inside were my folded sweaters, a hairbrush, the notebook I kept on my nightstand, and a half-empty bottle of the lavender lotion Eleanor had gifted me last Christmas. I heard the back door open behind me, Cairn. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned in the doorway with his arms crossed like he was waiting for me to throw a tantrum. New arrangement, he said, voice flat. Mom wants her space. Her space? I echoed, blinking slowly. He nodded toward the window. Guest shed. It's cleaned out. There's power. Should be enough. I just stared at him. You're not serious. She said it was this or, well, let's not make it messier than it has to be. Messy. That word again. Cairn's favorite. He always used it as a shield, like if he called it messy, then he wasn't part of the problem. Just a bystander. A clean observer. You know what she's doing, I said, quietly. His jaw tensed, but he didn't answer. I didn't fight it. I didn't beg. I took the box in my arms and walked outside. The morning was damp, air thick from rain the night before. The sun hadn't quite broken through the clouds yet. The shed sat at the far edge of the backyard, an old gardening shack that Dad had once promised to convert into a reading room. He never got to it. Isolde had turned it into storage, then forgotten it existed until now. Inside, the air was musty. One window, cracked. A thin twin mattress with a faded quilt. A lamp with a wobbly neck. No internet. No heat. I set the box on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress. There was a mirror on the far wall, oval, old, chipped at the corners. I walked toward it and stared. The woman staring back didn't look like someone who'd been reassigned. She looked like someone who was taking notes. That night, the wind picked up again. The trees outside the shed creaked and leaned. I had wrapped myself in the quilt and was sketching the house floor plan in my notebook, noting where I'd already hidden audio recorders. Around midnight, I heard it. A shuffle, then a small clink. I sat up, heart steady, not afraid, just alert. I opened the door and looked down. The mirror, the one from inside the shed, lay shattered at my doorstep, carefully arranged in a rough oval shape, shards glinting in the moonlight. On top of the largest shard was a handwritten message, scrawled in marker. Old ghosts should know when to stay buried. I crouched, picked up the piece. Blood beaded at my finger, but I didn't flinch. I didn't clean it up either. I left it as it was, walked back inside, and grabbed my notebook. I started writing. Dates, details, conversations, things Karen had said, things Isolde had done. Not just what they did, but how they did it. The pattern, the psychology. Every little method of control they deployed like clockwork. It wasn't journaling anymore. It was preparation. I drew a new map, highlighting blind spots in the hallway, places where sound traveled better. I marked where I'd place the next recording device. That same night, once the lights in the main house were off, I made a call. The number was still saved under M for Lawson, Dad's estate. It rang twice before a tired, older voice picked up. Lawson here. Hi, it's Beatrice, Murnane. A pause. A breath. I remember you. I need the will, I said. The version from 6 weeks before Dad passed, not the one Isolde gave the court. Beatrice, that version was never filed formally. Your father was waiting on some final revisions. I don't need it for court right now. I just need to see it. He sighed. You do know this could stir things up. They're already stirred. Another pause. Then, meet me tomorrow, after 4. I'll text the address. Thank you, I whispered. No promises, he replied. Just a meeting. We hung up. I stared at the wall of the shed for a long time. The broken mirror outside reflected nothing anymore, just fragments. But sometimes fragments were all you needed to piece the full picture. The next afternoon, I went into the study. Karen was gone. Isolde was running errands. I took a small book of poetry off the shelf, a red spine titled American Elegy, and slid the voice recorder inside its hollowed-out center. I placed it back carefully, angled toward the desk. No shaking hands. No guilt. If they wanted to lie, let's see how they sound on playback. Fear used to live in this house. I'm giving it a deadline. I didn't respond to Isolde's hissed threat that night at the study door. I didn't flinch. I didn't even turn around. I just kept walking, my heels echoing softly against the hardwood floor like punctuation to a sentence she didn't get to finish. That silence, that choice not to play her game, burned her more than any comeback ever could. 2 days later, I got wind of the gala. Not from anyone in this house, of course. Not a word from Karen, not even a fake smile from Isolde. I found out through Nadine, an old family friend who ran the community arts newsletter. She emailed me a link. Thought you'd be interested in this. The title made my stomach twist. A Legacy of Resilience, honoring the life and vision of Daniel Murnane. I clicked. A tribute to my father, hosted by Isolde, coordinated by Karen's media firm, and scheduled to be held at the West End Conservatory, the same place Dad used to play charity piano concerts. I wasn't on the list. Neither was Eleanor. But there she was, Isolde, on the website banner, smiling beside my father in a heavily edited photo, one I knew had once included me and Eleanor. We'd been cropped out. Just like that. I scrolled down to the promotional video. The music swelled, photos faded in and out, Dad at his desk, Dad on stage, Dad cutting the ribbon at the gallery opening. Not a single shot of Eleanor, not one of us at family dinners, nothing of our Sundays in the piano room. She had rewritten him. They're erasing everything, I whispered to myself, gripping the desk so tightly my knuckles blanched. That evening, I pulled out the old gallery badge Dad had given me when I was 20. My official Daughter of the Artist pass, he'd called it. I tucked it into my purse. The next day, I dressed carefully. Black dress, modest heels, hair down but pinned at the sides. I walked past security at the gala with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged, because I did. Inside, everything looked staged. Photos of Dad lined the entryway, printed in glossy black and white. Isolde's voice filtered through the speakers in the lobby, narrating like she had lived every moment with him. I kept my head down, moving through the crowd like smoke. Familiar faces passed by, people who'd once come to our home for Christmas parties, who'd toasted to Eleanor's pies, who'd told me how proud Dad was of me. Now they avoided eye contact, either too complicit or too afraid to acknowledge what they knew. In the green room behind the stage, I found Eleanor. She sat alone in a folding chair, a cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her dress was a shade too plain, her shoes not polished. You weren't invited, I said softly. She looked up. Karen said it might confuse people. Too many emotions. Bad optics. I swallowed the bile in my throat. She reached for my hand. I'm tired of being erased. I nodded. So am I. Moments later, we heard the applause. The lights dimmed. Isolde's voice took the stage. I stand here today, not just as the wife of a visionary, but as the steward of his dream. I stepped forward. She didn't see me until I was beside her. A second mic sat on its stand, waiting. I took it. Let's talk about whose legacy this really was, I said, clearly. Gasps swept the room like wind through dry leaves. Isolde froze. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I spoke evenly, naming dates, facts, the version of Dad's will I had uncovered, the footage I now carried with me, saved in multiple places, accessible in a heartbeat. I talked about Dad's final projects, the people who had helped him, not just Isolde and Karen, but the gallery staff, the students he mentored, Eleanor. Some of us didn't need a press release to matter to him, I said. A few phones were lifted, some people turned away, but more of them leaned in. When I finished, I placed the mic gently back on the stand and walked off stage. I didn't look back. As I stepped into the crowd, I spotted Eleanor standing at the edge of the audience. She didn't smile, she didn't cry. She just breathed, deep and steady. She was seen. Isolde caught up with me near the rear hallway, her face tight, her hands clenched around her clutch like she wanted to crush it. "You've made your choice," she hissed, stepping closer. "Now watch what I do with mine." I stared back at her, not afraid, not angry, just certain. "That's the difference between you and me," I said quietly. "I'm not afraid of being remembered for the truth." She turned sharply and walked away, heels striking the floor like she meant to leave cracks behind, but she couldn't erase what had already been said. The storm didn't hit that night, but it started moving closer. 2 mornings after the gala, Eleanor forgot how to finish her coffee sentence. We were sitting at the kitchen table, just the two of us, and I had asked if she wanted sugar. She looked at me blankly, then started to say something, paused mid-thought, and just stared into her cup. "That little," she began, then blinked twice. The scoop thing. For the..." Her hand hovered in midair like her brain was buffering. I watched her for a moment, nodding slowly, trying not to show the wave of nausea curling in my stomach. It wasn't her age. Eleanor was sharp. She could still quote the first line of every novel in the den by memory. But that morning, something in her eyes had changed, like she'd been fogged over. And it wasn't just once. That day, she asked me 3 times if I'd seen the red cardigan she always kept by the coat rack. It was on her lap the whole time. By afternoon, I found myself rifling through her pillbox. I'd never bothered to check it before. I'd trusted the labels, the setup, the consistency of dosage. But now I noticed 3 of the bottles didn't match the prescriptions from Dr. Klein's office. One didn't even have a label, just a red dot. I didn't say anything. Instead, I slid 2 of the pills into a sandwich bag and drove across town to visit Marie Geller. Marie was my old high school chemistry teacher, now semi-retired and managing a small compounding pharmacy outside of town. She didn't ask too many questions, which made her the right person to see. She looked at the pills through her reading glasses and whistled low. "Who gave these to your grandmother?" she asked, not looking up. "I was hoping you'd tell me." "These aren't memory pills, not even close." She tapped one against the glass jar on her desk. "This one's a sedative. Very strong. This other one is actually a discontinued tranquilizer. Hard to get unless someone's repackaging or paying cash under the table." I clenched my fists. Marie leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You didn't get these from a licensed pharmacy, Beatrice. Someone's either dosing her to keep her quiet or to make her seem incapable." I didn't need her to spell it out. I already knew. I thanked her, slid the bag into my coat pocket, and drove back home in silence, fingers tightening around the wheel at every red light. That night, after helping Eleanor to bed, I locked myself in the shed and pulled out the medical folder. Dad used to keep all his paperwork in color-coded folders, green for taxes, blue for house expenses, red for health. The red folder was still in the cabinet. I opened it. There they were, Appointment slips, old test results, and prescriptions all dated with Eleanor's name. But starting 6 months ago, I saw something strange. Every note had been initialed CM, Karen Maddox. Somewhere along the line, he had become her medical proxy, and I hadn't even known. My throat tightened. They weren't just stealing my father's voice anymore. They were dismantling Eleanor, slowly, legally, and without making a sound. The next morning, I began planting devices. One recorder went into the book I'd already hidden inside the study bookshelf. Another I taped beneath the side table next to Eleanor's chair in the sunroom. But the third one mattered most. Eleanor had a favorite pillow, a faded beige one, with little blue vines stitched along the edge. She kept it with her wherever she went, on the couch, in the den, sometimes even outside. It smelled like her perfume and winter laundry. I made a tiny incision in the seam and tucked the micro recorder inside, securing it in place before stitching it closed. It would activate with voice triggers and transmit data wirelessly to my backup drive. I wasn't waiting for another confrontation. I was building a record. By the afternoon, it rained again. Everyone else was gone. Cairn to meetings, Isolde claiming she had errands. I was home. I watched the monitors from the shed. That's when I caught it. The living room camera blinked on. Audio only, but clear. Isolde's voice came through, hushed but sharp. "Take your pills," she said. "The ones I give you. Not the ones Beatrice thinks are helping." There was a pause, then another sentence, colder than anything I'd heard from her mouth before. "If you say anything, I'll take away the picture of your son, too." I sat back, heart racing. She knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't impulse. It wasn't frustration. It was methodical. It was power, calculated, cruel, untraceable, unless someone had the nerve to catch it. I closed the laptop slowly. Then, I did what I knew I had to do. I uploaded the audio to a private cloud folder and labeled it Insurance. Then I opened my email, attached the file, and scheduled a send for 48 hours later. Subject line: If I disappear. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even sigh. Because I was done reacting. They wanted to break Eleanor's memory. I'd give them something unforgettable. There's a moment, just before you walk into a courtroom, when everything you are balances on the edge of silence. That's where I stood. Right outside the heavy wooden doors of the Charleston County Courthouse. My palm pressed flat against a folder brimming with truth. Truth that had, until recently, lived in shadows, in the pauses between family conversations, in the gaps between official documents. Now, it waited in printed pages and flash drives, tangible, unignorable. Inside that folder were audio files, a printed transcript of the video my father had left behind, medical records marked with too many red flags, statements from witnesses no one had asked before. And at the very back, protected by 2 plastic sleeves and a paperclip, the real will, the one Isolde had tried to erase like an error in a draft. I could feel the weight of it in my fingertips, not just the weight of paper, the weight of every year I had doubted myself, every time I'd been told I was overreacting, every time someone spoke over me because I didn't speak loud enough. Inside the courtroom, chairs shuffled, voices murmured. A cough. The low hum of fluorescent lights. I took a breath, slow, steady, and I opened the door. This wasn't just a probate hearing. That was the legal label typed neatly onto the docket. This was a reckoning, not just about property or inheritance or lines in a ledger. This was about control, about erasure, about who gets to tell the story when the person at the center of it is no longer alive to correct the lies. I stepped into the room like I meant it. Cairn was already seated. 3rd row from the front, arm draped lazily across the back of the bench like he was attending a board meeting. He wore that same expression he always did, half bored, half bulletproof, as if court was just another meeting on his calendar. Isolde sat beside him in navy silk, her pearls catching the overhead lights. She didn't look at me as I passed. She didn't need to. Her spine stiffened. Her jaw tightened. She knew I was there. I sat at the petitioner's table, alone. For a moment. Then the side door opened, and a thin man in a gray suit walked in, his gait slow but deliberate. Mr. Hallberg, the longtime assistant to my father's attorney, who had recently passed away. He said nothing, didn't smile, just placed a heavy brown envelope on the table in front of me and nodded once. That was enough. The judge entered. A woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a low bun and eyes that had seen too much to be easily impressed. Her voice, when she called the room to order, was calm but cut through the air like a scalpel. We began. I stood and introduced the challenge to the 2021 will submitted by Cairn and Isolde as fraudulent. I requested that the court review and recognize the legitimacy of the 2020 version, supported by the evidence enclosed. Hallberg handed the envelope to the bailiff. The judge accepted it without expression. "I'd like to begin with Exhibit A," I said clearly. A series of audio recordings taken within the Murnane home over the past 2 months. The room shifted. A small tech console in the corner blinked to life. A speaker crackled, and then Isolde's voice, not defensive, not nervous, sharp, cold, commanding. "Take your pills, the ones I give you, not the ones Beatrice thinks are helping." A beat of silence. Then, "If you say anything, I'll take away the picture of your son, too." The room gasped. Several heads turned toward her. Someone whispered something under their breath. The judge raised one hand for quiet, but didn't look away from the screen. Exhibit B. A video loaded. My father appeared, seated in the sunroom in his favorite sweater, bathed in warm morning light. His expression was calm, tired, but clear. "If you're watching this, I'm probably gone," he began. "Beatrice, don't let them tell our story for us." I felt a shift in the courtroom. A breath held collectively. My wife, Eleanor, and my daughter. These are the people who know who I was, who I am. If any other version of that is being sold to you, then you're buying a lie. The clerk paused typing. In the second row, a woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. I stayed still, my hands clasped in my lap. No tears, no tremble. Then came the documents. The 2020 will, dated, signed, notarized, and now, backed by video proof. His voice, his face, his intent. The judge took her time, reviewed each page, asked brief, surgical questions, clarified dates and signature placements. Then she leaned forward. "This court finds that the 2021 will was submitted under misrepresentation and with clear intent to defraud," she said. Her gaze shifted, straight to Isolde. "This hearing is no longer confined to matters of probate. It is now a matter of criminal investigation and prosecution." There was a sharp intake of breath. Cairn turned rigid beside her. The judge's voice didn't waver. "Isolde Ray will be remanded to custody pending trial on charges of elder abuse, coercion, and falsification of estate documents." The bailiff moved swiftly. The cuffs clicked softly. Isolde stood, but didn't fight. Her chin lifted, her lips pressed tight, like someone determined to make even shame look dignified. Cairn stood up suddenly. "This is absurd. She was trying to protect his legacy." The judge didn't blink. "Mr. Maddox," she said calmly, "you are hereby stripped of your status as executor. Any future involvement in estate management will be subject to court supervision and review." He froze. As Isolde was led away, she turned and hissed at me under her breath. "You think you've won?" I looked at her, not with triumph, but with truth. "I didn't win," I said softly. "I just didn't surrender." People began to stand. Some whispered, others avoided my eyes. Then, from somewhere in the back, one sound broke the hush. A single clap. I turned. The court reporter. She didn't smile, just stood beside her desk and clapped once more. Then another from the left row. And another. It wasn't applause for spectacle. It wasn't victory. It was relief, recognition, justice. I stood there as the soft rhythm of hands filled the room, not loud, not performative, just human. At the back of the courtroom, Eleanor sat still. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just exhaled, a full, deep breath. That was enough. Because not every story ends with applause. Some stories begin the moment silence is finally broken. It had been 2 months since the courthouse doors closed behind Isolde. 2 months since the cameras stopped rolling and the reporters packed up. Since Cairn disappeared into the system he once used to climb his way into public favor. Since I last stepped inside a courtroom, not as a daughter grieving in silence, but as a woman finally ready to be heard. I stood now in the same house where everything had begun, though nothing about it looked the same. The walls had been stripped of the sterile white paint Isolde once insisted on, and were now washed in soft, warm tones, muted sage in the hallway, deep amber in the sitting room. New photos lined the shelves, not polished portraits, but memories. Dad playing piano in the middle of a laugh, Eleanor holding a young me up to hang an ornament on a too-tall Christmas tree. The ones we never displayed because they looked too casual, she used to say. The guest shed had been transformed into a small reading nook, filled with books Eleanor had kept hidden in boxes, some so worn the pages curled like they were breathing. On the wall near the piano room, a wooden plaque now hung, carved simply but deeply, the Eleanor Memory Music Center. I ran my fingers over the grooves in the wood, then opened the lid of the old upright piano. Inside, right where I had left it years ago, lay the sheet music to The Ash Grove, a folk tune Dad loved to hum on rainy afternoons. The corners were soft from use, penciled markings dancing between the notes. "Still remember it?" I asked, turning to Eleanor, who sat quietly on the bench beside me. Her smile was faint, but true. "Only if you start." We played slowly, awkward at first, her left hand shaky, my timing a little off. But it didn't matter. The notes filled the house again, uneven and broken and perfect. That same week, I got a call from Mrs. Levette, the woman who had worked as our housekeeper for more than a decade before Isolde let her go without notice. She asked if she could stop by. I told her yes, of course, and baked a small batch of lemon muffins Eleanor used to love just in case. She arrived on Friday morning, slower than I remembered, cane in hand, but still sharp in the eyes. "I didn't come to stir things up," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. "I came to give back what I shouldn't have kept." She placed a small cardboard box on the table. Inside were envelopes, at least 2 dozen, addressed in Eleanor's familiar handwriting. Some were to Dad, some were to me. All of them, I realized, had dates spanning back almost 4 years. I was told to toss them, burn them if I wanted, but I couldn't. I couldn't unsee what she did, what she said. I figured, one day, someone would want the truth. She turned to Eleanor and gripped her hand gently. "I'm sorry. I should have done more." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You just did." That evening, I turned on the TV to check the weather. The station had already shifted to national coverage, but a local segment replayed quietly in the background. Isolde Ray, sentenced to 12 years without the possibility of parole. Her expression was blank as the camera followed her into the prison van. The reporter mentioned Cairn had accepted a plea deal, public record work in a different county, with no eligibility for a return to estate management for at least 10 years. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I just turned the TV off and sat in the quiet. I picked up a pen. For the first time in years, I wrote a letter to myself, not as a way to process pain, but as a promise to honor what had been lived through. I folded the paper and tucked it into a small box labeled "Open in 5 years." Inside it, I placed 3 things. A copy of the old will, now legally recognized. A still from the footage of Dad saying my name. And the letter, ending with, "You didn't need to win everything. You just needed to be brave when it counted." The next morning, the sun rose clearer than it had in weeks. Maybe it was timing, or maybe it was just the first morning I noticed it without the heaviness of waiting for someone else to decide who I was allowed to be. We hosted the community opening that afternoon. Neighbors trickled in slowly, faces hesitant at first, unsure if this was really the same place, the same family. Children ran through the garden Eleanor had replanted with help from a local school. Music played from the piano inside, no longer covered by a dust cloth. I didn't give a speech. There wasn't one prepared, but when the reporter from the local station asked if I had any words to share, I stepped in front of the window and simply said, This house was once a silence chamber. Today it sings. That was enough. Because not all wounds vanish. Some just stop bleeding long enough to let you breathe again. Sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who sit across from us at dinner, who call us family while quietly pulling the rug out from under us. Beatrice's story reminds us that silence can protect injustice, but one voice, at the right time, can change everything. Have you ever felt erased in your own family? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories about resilience, justice, and redemption. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard.